Welcome everyone. We are in the regular business meeting of December 19th. Halton Squallow and Please plus Squamish, Awayomeo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There is an amended agenda in front of Council. Just to outline the amendment is an addition of, under the very last item, Council staff announcements, just because there's no better place to put it, on a motion from earlier today with regard to supporting a needs analysis for childcare in the community. It was a recommended motion from the committee earlier today, as well as there are some minutes that have been corrected with regard to the Public Art Committee. There was a delegation on the phone that wasn't referenced in the minutes. And there's an additional letter from Mayor Finlater from West Kelowna, regarding cannabis sales tax revenue. And I believe those are the amendments. Is that correct? So looking for a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, we have one delegation. We have Rob MacLeod from Garibaldi at Squamish with regard to the SLRD RGS major amendment process. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. Good to be back with you all. At the afternoon here, it's good that, won't say I missed it, but my name is Rod MacLeod. I'm the Vice President of Planning for Garibaldi at Squamish. When we are proposing to build the mountain resort on Rome Ridge. We're here today to ask Council to reject the SLRD proposal for a major amendment that removes language enabling a destination resort from the regional growth strategy. The three items in this major amendment take our destination resort proposal from being specifically encouraged and allowed for to being specifically included. And it does so in the middle of us working through the provincial approval process, which has been mandated by several ministries. We know this may not legally be downzoning, but it certainly looks and acts like it. A provincial environmental certificate was issued in January of 2016 that contained 40 conditions. Many of these are extensive and detailed and will result in this resort being one of the most studied and protected areas in BC. The project has the general support of several provincial agencies, the EAO, Mountain Resorts Branch, Ministries of Tourism and Jobs, and of equal importance, the Squamish Nation. We have an MOU with the nation that outlines the benefits, job training and employment, spin-off jobs, cultural and heritage awareness, and we're just also discussing with them a name change to better reflect their history and culture on that mountain. I hope that Council read the interview with Chief Ian Campbell in the Peak last week. He was pretty direct in his condemnation of this proposed amendment. And if you don't have a copy, let me know and I can get you one. I've spent a lifetime working, planning, building, and playing in mountain resorts. Every time I get up to this mountain, I get more excited about the recreational opportunities. There's incredible skiing, magnificent views, potential for great hiking and biking trails, alpine meadows full of wildflowers. There's also a lot of very tangible benefits. The resort will provide year-round jobs and economic value for all the people of the region and the province, including significant taxation revenue. In the survey that you saw 2 weeks ago out of the budget input, 30% of residents now commute out of town to work. We will be able to offer many of those people jobs at home, improving their family life, the environment, and the local economy. This is a unique opportunity to properly plan a mountain resort right from the beginning, with all the best practices to ensure sustainable prosperity. The District of Squamish will have the opportunity to supply oversight and input to the planning process all along the way if you decide to get involved. The MRB manages all mountain resorts on behalf of the province. At their request, we have prepared a new master plan in preparation for a master development agreement. The professional planners that prepared this used the smart growth and regional growth strategy ideals. Basically, we took the wording in the regional growth strategy and used it as a checklist to do our planning. The planning process takes place in the MRB timeframe and format. There have been many delays. The provincial election, the fire season, and the Squamish Nation elections. We anticipate getting back to you early in 2018 to talk about our master plan and give you some of the details and answer some of the questions that you're going to have. The intention is to start construction in 2021 and open in the fall of 2023. Now, the MRB approvals specify the phasing of the resort development, always keeping in balance the uphill capacity, the downhill capacity, the beds, and the village amenities. And one of the things that they do as part of that is that there's 4 phases in this resort. Phase 4, or any phase, cannot start until the previous phase has proven to be successful as its own standalone resort. We understand there are many unanswered questions, and we look forward to providing you with full answers. Squamish residents will have many opportunities to provide input through the master planning process, potentially through a referendum on boundary extension, and through the municipal permitting process. Rejecting this SLRD initiative will allow the project to come back to you many times over the next few years at each stage of the process. And together we can shape this project to the greatest benefit of the citizens of Squamish. There are many, many issues to be worked on, and we look forward to working together with you on those. We ask that you defeat the proposed SLRD amendment and respond to the SLRD within the 60-day time period allotted. Thank you. Any questions?
That's for me to ask. Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Well, I know there's lots of jobs, but I'll just stick to the topic. How do you feel as though if we support the SLRD motion, it's just semantics that you don't like, or does it actually change rules for you? Or
So right now, Councillor Pryor, through you, Madam Mayor, the regional growth strategy specifically outlines a destination resort in their wording. There's 2 pages in there, it's in the report. By them taking that out, it takes us from being specifically in to being specifically out. And they've directed it at our project. There's 2 of the motions are a bit general, but the 3rd one is specifically aimed at our project. So it's another speed bump and a curve and an obstacle we're going to have to overcome.
okay, I've got more, but I'll wait.
Yeah, now, questions for the delegation? Don't see any. Councillor Blackman-Moore.
Oh, more just a comment. I know you'll be coming back, so I just wanted to put this out there as you prepare for the next presentation. I recall in our last conversation on this matter, one of the things that would, I think, be helpful to understand is some of the potential, you alluded to potential tax revenue increases for the district, and sort of if the applicant has some research on that to present, that I think that would be helpful for council's deliberation.
Thank you. We will do that.
Any more questions?
Well, I just want to make sure. I mean, I don't want to necessarily hamper the project. So you figure this is going to slow you down?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, this will slow us down. It's a whole. So yes, we have to get an OCP amendment and an RGS amendment, but this is a whole nother. This is something that's in, and they're proposing to take it out. So it's just a whole nother pile of work for us to do, and going to slow things down.
Thank you. So you would have to go through the regional growth strategy, whether the language was in there or not. Is that correct?
That's what the planners at the regional district say. What I've said to them, again, is not as a planner, is that why would we have to do that when it's already there, allowed for? It's already in the regional growth strategy. It's there. It says how to do a destination resort. right? So by taking it out, it means that we've then got to put it back in at some point.
So that would be, can I just follow up with that?
Yeah, go on.
You wanted-
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So so taking out the amendment, the entire destination resort for any destination resort would have to be put in there, not just for us.
That's my understanding, Madam Mayor, that's whether it's, you know, something on Seton Lake that would go in, or this, yes, but it's specifically, the wording specifically talks about Garibaldi as gone.
The wording in,
In the discussion at the SLRD, not in the motion itself,
not in
the
the
amendment.
language in the RGS and not in the motion
That's right.
at all. It was just given it as an example of how,
Right.
of a resort that's been proposed. As you said, regardless of the language in here, an RGS amendment would have to happen, regardless isn't the word, regardless of the language. And I would not call the language in the RGS enabling. It's a framing language. So it doesn't necessarily enable. It says, if we're going to consider resorts, there's some criteria by which lens we will view them. And that's what the language in here. And we have this on the agenda, so council will get into a whole
Understand.
discussion about it, but I just wanted to clarify
Okay, thank you.
that for everybody.
And I'll stay for that discussion. If
Please
there's any
do,
other
yeah.
questions, I'll be here. Thank you.
We have a timed item. Actually, I'll just do consideration of unscheduled public tenants, so I don't, yep, so it's for an issue that is time sensitive and can't wait until our next council meeting, which is January 10th. So please come up and just say what the topic is and why it is an urgent matter. And then council can decide if we can.
Gord Addison, 1022 Pier Road, and I'd like to speak on the regional growth strategy.
Okay, if council.
It is time sensitive, it has to be passed by January 8th, which pretty well means this meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it is timely. And I'm just trying to think of the sequencing, because normally if unscheduled public ends at the end. So what I'll do is I'll ask for the council if they're okay if we entertain this speaker. You want a motion to that effect? And that we bring it forward so you can speak now. So moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Chappelle. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead, Gord.
So, what the heck is an SLRD RGS OCP amendment, and why should anyone care? Why is it important to talk about this 6 days before Christmas? Well, this could be the most significant decision this council makes in the future of Squamish. There's no need to pass this and give remote jurisdictions the power to say yes or no to the next Quest University, affordable housing development, or any proposed resort. The current regional growth strategy was dealt with years ago, and it's fine the way it is. SLRD staff would tell you this amendment does not change anything, and the Mayor of Bylaw says this is just tweaking a few words. SLRD politicians say this amendment doesn't really matter and that everything has to be passed anyway. Move along, nothing to see here. But anyone who's watched the council meeting knows that it's simply not true. Every big project that comes through council is tagged as one that either fits with the community plan or one that does not, and this is the all-important starting point. About a decade ago, the SLRD first attempted to impose these restrictions on Squamish. Councillors in this chamber stood up for Squamish and fought back. They made it clear that Squamish had to maintain control over its own destiny and won the control that the SLRD wants to take away today. I would urge Squamish Council to unanimously reject this change and to ensure that important decisions on the future of Squamish continue to be made in Squamish by you, the people who are responsible to the voters of Squamish. A perfect example of how this could hurt Squamish is Quest University, which actively shopped Whistler and Squamish before deciding to locate here in order to make that happen. In order to make that happen, Squamish agreed to exactly the type of rezoning and OCP amendment that we now have to go through we would now have to go beg the SRD to approve. Having control then ensures that Squamish can make its own decisions and improve our community with projects like Quest University. This is supposed to be about Garibaldi Squamish, and to those who want to make this pass, it certainly is. But for Squamish, this is really only about the ability of Squamish to make its own decisions. And the timing of this process is really interesting and reflects exactly the type of thing that makes people skeptical of politicians and bureaucrats. The SLRD planning staff in Pemberton tried to pass this behind everyone's back as a minor amendment, but thanks to red flags raised by the Squamish Nation, we actually get to discuss this. There was a public hearing on this, advertised over Labor Day weekend in only one Whistler publication, and they held a public hearing in Pemberton, at the beginning of September. I follow these things and I heard nothing about it. If Squamish is going to surrender decisions and control over land within its boundaries to Whistler, informing the citizens of Squamish and holding a public hearing in Squamish would be fair and transparent. But instead, we find ourselves discussing this at council just days before Christmas when other people who wanted to talk on this could not make it. And if this is not defeated today, the SLRD will deem to it passed by default. Why is this coming forward now? I don't know for sure, but Whistler Blackcomb was recently purchased by Vail Resorts. I'm sure where Vail Resorts did a basic SWOT analysis and found the possibility of a competing resort in Squamish was a major threat to the bottom line and would mean more competition for employees and less profits for the resort shareholders. This looks like a move to prevent that threat, and is perhaps the real reason this is coming forward now and seems so urgent and secretive. To the extent that this is about a ski resort in Squamish, I understand there have been significant changes to the original Garibaldi and Squamish plans, and I look forward to seeing them. At this point, I'm not sure if the newly replanned Garibaldi and Squamish resort is a good idea for Squamish. I'm not sure if the plan will protect Squamish taxpayers or Squamish values. But I'm absolutely sure that the decision on whether to proceed and build a new resort that is part of Squamish should be made by Squamish Council and the citizens of Squamish, and not by remote politicians in the SLRD with different interests and agendas. And this decision should certainly not be made by or at the behest of American-owned resorts. But I would reiterate that this is not about Garibaldi at Squamish Resort. It's about the ability of Squamish to control its own future without interference from Whistler and the SLRD. So the decisions on the next Quest University or affordable housing project or any resort of any type are made in Squamish by Squamish politicians. And I reiterate, the regional growth strategy is fine the way it is. And this is just a bad deal. Squamish gives Whistler and the SLRD exactly what they want: veto power over adding a ski resort or new developments or projects. But what do we get in return? A say over developments in Pemberton or Lillooet? Why would we want that? Regional growth strategies are important, but they should be guidelines, not a straitjacket. So it's clearly in the best interest of the future of Squamish to tell the SLRD that Squamish will determine its own future and its own path. Thank you very much. Please stick up for Squamish and for the open and transparent process, and vote this change down unanimously. Thanks, and I hope you all have great holidays.
Councilor Pryor?
Oh, hey, Gord.
Nope.
So you talk about the process,
Yep.
and didn't you see anything coming from Squamish about this?
They held a public hearing in Pemberton on first week in September, and they advertised it only in the Whistler Peak on August 31st and September 7th.
So there was no public information meeting in Squamish as far as you
No, no. It seems a very kind of, they tried to get a minor amendment, right? So I think it's an issue.
Was it a public information meeting? There just wasn't a public hearing, just to clarify. There were public information meetings like in February, March, I can't remember when. But they're two different things.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that.
So but this has a huge impact for Squamish, and they only held a public hearing in Pemberton, advertised over the Labor Day long weekend.
Thanks.
Councilor Elliott.
I know this is on our agenda later, but maybe our SLRD reps can speak to some of the assumptions made in that statement about vetoes, that sort of thing, when we get to it on the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there SLRD reps here?
Yeah, there's two.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else have a timely matter they'd like to speak to on the agenda? Yeah. Come on up and state your name and the reason why it's timely, and then possibly consider it.
So my name's Jeff Levine. I live at 1589 Eagle Run Drive in Brackendale. And it's the amendment that Gord was just talking about. It is timely because,
The RGS.
yeah, the RGS.
Moved by Councilor Race, seconded by Councilor Pryor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead.
I just see, obviously, I've heard that this was just a minor reframing of policy and stuff like that. What is the urgency? So my question is, what is the urgency to have it done now? I mean, the Garibaldi at Squamish has been on the books and been a project for so long in Squamish. And I just think the timeliness of what's happening right now and the fact that it was just a minor reframing of policy when the project is just coming back, it's got the environmental approvals and stuff, and it just seems questionable as to why the timing for minor policy reframing now. What's the urgency? And I think we should just see this process, you as a municipal council for Squamish, representing Squamish, should just see this process through and maybe put the reframing of the policy on the regional growth strategy. Maybe put that on hold if it's not that urgent until the Garibaldi at Squamish has gone through, because this is on the books in Squamish. We've been talking about this for a long time, and to try to start changing some of the rules now with the regional growth strategy and the SLRD, I don't think it's too fair. We are our own population in Squamish. We are our own municipality. I think we need to stick up for that and don't cede control to other people and other municipalities.
And just to clarify, similar to an OCP, there's direction that OCPs get redone every 5 years. Sometimes it lags. So we're currently going into the 6th year with the RGS. So, and the first draft, the version in front of us was the very first RGS ever. So this, simply put, is just the natural process by which the provincial government tells regional districts to go and look at your regional growth strategy every 5 years and make amendments, either minor or major. And so it's just, this is just that evolution. That's why the timing's happening now. It started about 1.5 years ago in terms of the process. So we're sort of at 1.5 years at the end of the process. And as I think Rod alluded to, the original one was, we're going to clean up some language, we're going to tweak this here and there, and Garibaldi at Squamish, and which would have been a fairly, it's a little different than OCP, and I'm going into some of the background stuff, but an OCP is a much clearer process for people because we go through those types of amendments in municipalities all the time. Regional growth strategy has different layers of deliberation, let me put it that way. So there's a minor amendment process, it's clearly articulated what boxes you have to tick to do that. There's a major amendment process. At that point, there is more say in member municipalities, and regional districts on the periphery have basically the ability to influence a little bit more, but they don't have the ability to veto, because let's say Lillooet decides that they don't like a major amendment in the RGS, there's an arbitration process that follows that. So if it's an 8-to-1 vote or a 7-to-2 vote, and there's lots of reasons, the arbitration process may, so it's not simple like an OCP, it's very much different than an OCP in terms of the process. So I just wanted to clarify in terms of what some of this stuff, as with an OCP, unless it's maps, a map says you can and can't do something here, they're generally guidelines. And they're not enabling guidelines. An OCP is not an enabling document, it's a vision document. RGS is not an enabling document, it's a vision document. It doesn't mean anything's got approval, and everything that doesn't fit in with the mapping and other parameters has to go through a major amendment or a minor amendment process, or potentially an arbitration with the RGS anyway, regardless of if there's a sentence about resort destinations or 10 paragraphs. Any resort, whether it's a hot springs up in Meager Creek or whatever, any resort would have to go through likely a major amendment process, particularly something as big as Garibaldi Squamish, would have to go through a major amendment process regardless.
So, yeah, absolutely, and I understand what you're saying, but just as an outsider and what you're reading in the papers, it just seems, wait a second, what's going on here? Like, it just seems, just from an average citizen looking at it, it just seems suspicious that all of a sudden now the SLRD is wanting to change things about resort developments just when Squamish is trying to come into its own with their own resort. It just, to me, I just don't understand.
Yeah, and we've got it on the agenda, so we'll probably get into the debate and the discussion and the questions for staff at that point, but appreciate your comment. I will ask for, if anyone else has unscheduled public attendance. I don't see anyone. We do have a timed item. Next up is 7A1, development permit number 474, waterfront landing phase 1. And And this is a DP with a variance, so there is a public opportunity to comment on the variances, so I'll just read the statement. This is the DP permit number 474, Waterfront Landing Phase 1, Laurelwood. The proponent and members of the public will be given an opportunity to be heard or present written submissions respecting the following requested variance to the District of Squamish zoning bylaw. Variance to section 40JJ 6B, off-street parking and loading to reduce the required visitor parking spaces from 17 to 13 spaces. After I have confirmed that it is your turn to speak, please approach the podium and commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address. Please note that speakers will be given a maximum of 5 minutes to address the council. I'll now go to the planning department to present the DP.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Jonas Wilnishkas, Director of Community Planning, and with me today is Susan Stratis, our consultant working for the district in reviewing this application.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The application we're reviewing tonight is the first phase of the Waterfront Landing Development, DP 474. The applicants have named it the Laurelwood neighborhood. The location of the property is 1500 Highway 99, adjacent to Laurelwood Road on the east side of the Mamquam Blind Channel, as shown on the maps. Just as background to this, brief background, on September 5th, Council adopted the sub-area plan and the zoning amendment bylaws for Waterfront Landing. September 19th, Council issued the temporary use permit for the sales center. The applicants went to the design panel, advisory design panel, on October 19th. November 15th, notice was received from the Ministry of Environment that the site remediation plan was accepted and the DP may be issued, and that was related to the contaminated site issue on the site. November 16th, the applicants returned to the advisory design panel. December 5th, a new site alteration permit was issued. This is the second one issued by the district, and this one incorporated the filling of the drainage ditch on site. Provincial approval had been received for that. And December 6th, there was a preliminary layout review issued for the subdivision application that is happening concurrently with the development permit we're considering. So just briefly, the policy framework, the land is designated downtown in the OCP. The sub-area plan designates the land mixed density residential. The site is within DPA 10, which is the development permit area specific to Waterfront Landing, and also within DPA 11, which is the riparian area DPA. The site is within the flood hazard area, and a flood hazard study has been done, and a flood covenant is registered on title establishing the flood construction levels. And the zoning is CD 40 for the site. So the property that is under consideration tonight is phase 1 of 7 phases of development located abutting Laurelwood Road. The proposed development consists of 88 townhouse units on 1.58 hectares of land. There are 12 buildings proposed with 4 to 10 units within each of those 12 building blocks. The housing options are fairly diverse. There are 6 different unit types, and the development now includes 6 lock-off units within those. So there are 49 two-bedroom plus flex space suites, and there are 39 three-bedroom. The average unit size is just over 1,400 square feet, and there is quite a range within that average. So looking at the site plan, this goes back to the original concept that was presented during the rezoning process. It is a formal urban layout with a purposely designed grid system. And the roads, I'll just give me a second here to get this working. Jonas is special at that. So Laurelwood Road runs along here, and the first public road leading into the site is on that side, And on the north side is another public road, that wraps around the site. There are 3 entrances to the development site shown in blue, and there are no points of entry along Laurelwood, which will have to function as an arterial road. And the future apartment site is shown here. A few other features: there are internal strata roads, and these are running as was originally designed to provide flow through to the waterfront, with the waterfront being in this direction. The site has a main central park area located here so that it can eventually serve both the apartment and this neighborhood. And there's a linear park corridor that's actually quite wide here. It's about 100 feet wide, that serves as an additional play space. This block of units here have an internal mews, so that there's an additional pathway system here. And running east-west is north-south is a section of the multipurpose trail that runs around the perimeter of the whole site. The active transportation components played an important part in the site development and working with staff as we were reviewing these plans. And deciding on the structure of Laurelwood Drive, which is actually part of the subdivision application, but it also affects how the site will be developed, was an important consideration. So ultimately what was decided with engineering was a bike lane will be developed on the railroad side, which is the east side of Laurelwood Drive. Adjacent to the site is a multi-purpose path that is primarily meant to be pedestrian-oriented. Laurelwood Drive will have a left turn bay with a major access point to the site here, so that there won't be any stacking space when Laurelwood is eventually opened as an arterial road. And Laurelwood was reconfigured to provide bus pull-offs. There's one adjacent to the site here, and there's another one off the site adjacent to the rail, so the buses can stop in both directions, planning ahead for the day when there is a bridge crossing of the Mount Combine Channel. The perimeter of the site has a sidewalk system and a multi-purpose, fairly wide pathway system here, and again the central one running through the site. And the strata trails are shown in the blue dotted lines that allow people to move throughout the site. All of these active transportation systems are paved and lit, including the ones within the development itself. So the advisory design panel, when the applicants went in October, they supported the DP in principle, but they had quite a few items they weren't happy with, and there was a fairly lengthy list of items to be further resolved. The applicants did go back to the drawing board and came back in November to the advisory design panel, and the project was much better received in November and well supported by the advisory design panel, with some fairly minor recommendations to be resolved with staff. So the changes that were made with the project that's in front of you now is a much bolder, more contemporary approach to the design, with inspiration based on marine warehouses, a more cohesive color scheme and simplified materials. The first design submission had too many materials, I guess. That would be the simplest way to say that. The roof lines have been revised and are based mainly on imposing gable roofs, and I'll show you the pictures in a second here. Additional windows were added with improved window proportions. The canopies over the decks and door openings were extended and details were enhanced. New industrial detailing was provided for the entrances and privacy areas, and a number of wayfinding elements have been added, including seating nodes at the corners of the streets and improved community gardens. There were also revisions made to the play area, and the plant list was refined based on ADP input and also the Community Food Council recommendations played into that. So looking at some of the buildings, there are 3 main color groups that have been used. The contemporary industrial materials include corrugated metal panels and metal panel siding, which are the materials you see in the red and the brown colors. There are some areas of fiber cement with both smooth and lap siding. The fences are cedar, and there are some larger timbers used in the gates. And the canopies, which don't show too well on this, are metal, and the underneath soffits are painted wood. So this is just one of the design images showing the blue basic color group of buildings. And you can see the bold gable forms that cast shadows, and these gables wrap around the entire buildings. And a lot of the corner detailing is the improvements that happen between the first and second meeting with the advisory design panel. These are the red buildings. Again, you can see the strong vertical shapes of those roof lines, and the industrial warehouse images that were in the window placements. And this is the copper-colored buildings. This particular building faces one of the park areas, and it kind of shows you the relationship between all the units have front yard space, and they're meant to open out into these play areas. Just looking at the streetscape a bit, these elements, which are a standard street light but clad with a metal cladding and room for banners to be hung, these are actually part of the subdivision approval because they sit on the public street, but they're shown in these DP drawings just for context, and the district engineering staff are going to have to approve and kind of buy into those features in the subdivision process. We hope they do like them. Just looking at the back of the units where the parking goes, so these would be the strata roads, and the decks are all placed on the back rather than the front of buildings to keep the front simple. So there are private deck spaces on top of the garages here. All of the units have 2 parking spaces. Some of them actually end up with 4 because they've got a double garage. These are primarily single garages. The applicants added windows to these garages to help with the image on the strata roads. The strata roads, back to that original site plan, are designed as dead-end streets, and that was done purposely to create a very slow traffic environment that can actually function as an additional play space. And these are some of the details of the canopies that have been added to cover the spaces. The ones on the end units, some of them have a full canopy coverage, others have a partial canopy. So looking a bit more closely at the neighborhood open space and the landscape plans, there's a very generous tree canopy and landscaping throughout the site. The central flex space is meant to provide areas for playing, walking with dogs. In the main park area, there is a central community gardens, and over here is a children's play facility that is a wood structure. There is more details on some other plans. And over here is a quieter seating area with places to picnic and just sit and meet with your neighbors. The community gardens, there was a fair bit of discussion. The applicants talked to the Community Food Council, and I also spoke with them, and so some changes have been made to this community gardens to reflect their comments. There is a composting area provided, or composter, and a fairly large storage shed has been added. And I think one of the other important recommendations is a lot of the plant materials have been specified as bee-friendly plants and also pesticide-free. And I actually can't pronounce the neonicotinoids, I think it is something along those lines, that is the pesticide that's very harmful to plants. And the landscaper was able to source a number of plant materials that are free of that, so that's a fairly important step. The bike racks and mail kiosk are also in the central area. And here's just another view of the internal trail system. Again, the fences are kept low to keep a lot of movement between the trail system and people's yard spaces. The private outdoor yard spaces, all units have direct access to a yard as well as outdoor decks and patios. The entrances and porches are covered, and this slide shows some of the custom fences and railing details that have been added with metal, I've forgotten the term for that, but special custom metal design fences and gates. The amount of private outdoor open space exceeds the bylaw requirements in the zoning bylaw. It's fairly generous outdoor space. Another thing that has been added in response to ADP input is additional accessibility in the 6 lock-off suites that are proposed in a number of the corner units have been made fully adaptable, and this has been attached to the development permit itself, the commitments that have been made. But just very briefly, the lock-off units have a level entrance from the street and from their parking areas with an unobstructed path of travel. Internally, there are a lot of features such as pocket doors, lever handles. The minimum distances have been met in the bathroom, and the kitchen has stoves and counter spaces designed so that wheelchairs can go under these counters, and the switches and electrical outlets are also designed to be reachable by a person in a wheelchair. The trails and walkways, as I mentioned, are all hard surfaced and lit, and the playground has now been changed to have resilient surfacing, which is another important feature for people with disabilities. The applicants have also made a commitment to a number of sustainability items. They're going to build to built green silver, and that will require at the building permit stage that the plans are certified. They've committed to waste diversion, water conservation. There are a number of stormwater management features, including detention and infiltration in the landscaping, and a number of rain gardens along the greenways. There are a number of drought-tolerant indigenous plant materials. I would say the plant materials are getting quite challenging. We're looking for drought-resistant, bear-resistant, food production, and quite a few things that is making it more challenging for the landscape architects all the time to come up with the right mix of plant materials. All of the lighting is full cutoff LED lighting, dark skies compliant. And the pathways and bike lanes that are a feature of this development reduce vehicle reliance, and all of the building and landscape materials are intended to be very durable. So those are their sustainability commitments. As mentioned by the mayor at the start, there is a variance requested as part of this application, and it's a bit unusual. The CD zone requires a total of 199 spaces. Which are 2 per unit for the townhouses, 1 for each of the lock-off suites, and then a visitor parking count of 17 spaces. The site overall actually provides more than that, and the reason we need a variance is those spaces aren't in exactly the right place. Some of the units that have double garages end up being counted as 4 because they've got two garage spaces and then 2 parked outside. So it brings your numbers up and it looks like you've got an excess of parking. But in fact, we didn't meet the number for the lock-off suite. So what we've proposed is reducing the visitor parking from 17 to 13 so that 4 of the visitor parking spaces can be assigned to the lock-off suites. And the wording of the development permit is specific that those that variance is subject to making sure those units, those lock-off suites are built. And if they were for any reason, I can't imagine why they wouldn't be built, but if they weren't, then the variance does not apply. So we have not yet received any public comments on this variance. It is actually a fairly minor change, and the project is well supplied both with on-site parking, and there is perimeter parking on all of the road system that's surrounding it. So the recommendations, just for the benefit of the clerk, I have actually shortened, just for the sake of the slide, the first recommendation is for provision of landscaping in the amount of $1.2 million. The second recommendation we have changed since the agenda went out, and it is intended to read as I've written it here, and the changes are shown in red. So I'll just read that the DP be issued subject to the provision of a cash contribution to the District of Squamish for future implementation of a commercial car sharing service in an amount equivalent to 2 car share vehicles, with the amount and form of the contribution to be determined by the General Manager of Community Planning and Infrastructure. And the reason that was changed, when we first wrote the recommendation, it was expected that the district may be setting up a reserve fund, which is how a lot of communities work with the car share vehicle companies such as Modo. They have a parking reserve. They have a reserve fund for car share vehicles similar to your parking reserve fund. Because the district has not yet set that up, and we're not sure if the district is going to do that, we've written the resolution so that the General Manager of Community Planning and Infrastructure can determine how that money will be brought to the district. And so
If I may,
yeah,
just clarify that. So we are working on bringing forward a bylaw that will create this reserve. We're just not sure whether the best way to do this transaction will be for the developer to pass the money straight to the car share company once we select one, or whether it should come to the district and sit in a reserve and then we pass the money to the car share company. So this gives us flexibility to go either way.
thank you. And that's the change. And then the second recommendation is regarding the variance, which the mayor has already read, that the visitor parking be reduced from 17 to 13 spaces, subject to occupancy permits being issued for the 6 lock-off suites. And that's the end of my recommendations.
I'll go to council first. Are there any questions for clarification purposes? Council Risk.
Thank you. So the flood construction level has been set, but I noticed this is a 3-story building, that these are 3-story buildings, and the ground floor is occupied. Is the entire site being lifted?
Yes, that's
By
correct.
approximately how much? You know?
I don't have that tidbit on top of my head. I think the flood construction level is 4-point-something meters. So yes, if you looked out on the site, I actually noticed it this afternoon. There has been a great deal of filling going on, and that has been the plan from the start, is to fill, to raise it so that the lower floors can be used for living space.
So the entire site, the road network and the whole
Yes.
thing would come up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
For the units that have one garage space and then the other space is on the pad outside,
Yes.
are those full length pads that could
Yes.
accommodate large vehicles?
They meet your zoning bylaw requirement of 6 meters, and if somebody is, which is the distance that's required in your zoning bylaw, there's possibly some vehicles that don't, but the majority of vehicles, yes, do fit within 6 meters. Your standard truck will, but I think, as we know, there are some vehicles in Squamish that possibly don't. And it's a very challenging issue because the developers are reluctant to provide more space than that because it really affects the density when only a small percentage of vehicles don't fit. And I think that's where the street parking comes in. There are, in total on this site, 200 on-street parking spaces, and they do surround the perimeter of the site fully. So that's really the option for those kind of vehicles.
Did I see a hand over here? No. Any other questions for clarification purposes? I will go to the public. There's a variance on this development permit, so we do open the floor up to the public to comment on the variances. If anyone would like to speak to the variances, please come up, state your name and your address, and indicate if you're representing yourself, a business, or an organization. I don't see any. Are there any other questions? Councillor Elliott.
Not specific to the DP, I guess, but you mentioned the bike lane is on the east side of Laurelwood. And so what's the plan for moving people from the bike lane into, where are bikes safely crossing into this development, and how are we accommodating that in our road plan?
I'll just go back to the site plan. That's all right to answer the question. Through the mayor, yeah, I could have brought a better site plan that goes out, pulls us out a little bit further. There is a crossing here, and I guess this all goes back to, let me just see if the other plan shows it better. The new rail crossing comes down Clark to Laurelwood, and you then travel along Laurelwood. There is a bike lane established in the engineering design for the Clark overpass, and then as you go along Laurelwood, it continues. And the idea was that the people will have a continuous bike lane on the right-hand side of Clark and along Laurelwood. They will have to cross at a designated crosswalk to get into the community. That was really the only way to do it. So there will be a full crosswalk here.
If I may just add to that, the reason for the bike lane to be on the east side was so that it could go across Pemberton, and then it doesn't have to cross that intersection. It ends up on the right side, past Pemberton, past the blind channel.
Councillor Shaw.
Is the pedestrian bridge going to accommodate bikes as well?
Through the mayor, the pedestrian bridge is still being designed, but yes, it's meant to be. It will be bike and pedestrian, probably separated.
So I just wanted to clarify, what's in front of us is only the DP in the red dashed line. DPs for those other phases and those other areas will be coming back, and council.
I just wanted to know the internet for the bike lane that's proposed for the development today, to make sure that
That's, I just reminded council that we can't go into the whole thing because we're here to talk about the development permit and the variance on the development permit. Any other questions for council? I don't see any. Is there anyone who would like to, I'll just go back to the public one more time. Anyone like to speak to the variances of the DP? And I'll go to a third time. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the variances of this development permit? Seeing none, we'll look for councillor to Councillor Race.
I'll move the recommendation.
The recommendation is to approve the DP with the
With the variance.
5 stall variance.
Four.
4 stall variance. Seconded by Councillor Black and Wolf. Councillor Race?
Yeah, just for clarity, we're talking about the amended recommendation was put on the screen?
Yes. With the 4 stall variance.
Yeah. No, so actually happy to support this. Going through the report, first of all, I love the colors. I have to say, I thought that was great. There's certainly a sort of a neat funk to the development. So I think if it's built out this way, it will be attractive. It also ticks off a lot of boxes that this council, I think, has sort of voiced opinion on over the last few developments, in particular the internal walkability of the development, the active transportation part, but also just getting from one townhouse to another within the development in a safe and pleasant fashion without having to go out on a road somewhere. So I think this is a great start to that development, and I will be supporting it.
Anyone else wants to speak to this DP? Councillor Black and Wolf?
Yeah, it's really good to see some lock-off suites actually being included. I hope to see more of those in the future developments. But I think that in addition to this obviously being a spectacular site geographically, the way that the applicant has put the project together in terms of the appropriate heights, mix of uses, and focus on pedestrians is going to make this a very desirable neighborhood. So.
Councillor Kent?
Yeah, so I agree with both comments, and I think it's not only how well they've listened to council and the ADP as far as they've gone ahead with their plans, but also they're forward thinking and taking matters into their own hands in their design. It's terrific.
Yeah, I'm going to speak in favor of this DP. I think the variances, because of the lock-off suites, is an acceptable variance, and I agree with Councillor Blackman-Wolf. I think that's a great step, and I think we're looking to see more of those. I was also too really pleased, we were starting to get a bit of a standard vernacular with some of the developments that are coming forward, and this one, I really liked the vernacular. I think it's got a different, interesting design to it. It's further, I think, refining what the Squamish vernacular looks like. I like the materials. I think it certainly meets all the criteria as we've outlined within our development permit guidelines for permeability of the site, for sustainability initiatives. I did actually want one clarification on the LEEDs designation. Is this neighborhood LEEDs, or is it just every building is LEEDs?
In response to that question, it's not LEEDs, it's built green, which
Oh,
is a
I thought it
different
said LEED
rating
in the
system.
report. It's built green?
built green.
It's built green, silver, yes.
I think
Oh,
it said LEED silver in the report, I thought I read. But
that's quite possible.
maybe
They're
I
wrong,
read
but
it
it
wrong.
is.
Anyway, so it's just the buildings are LEED, not the neighborhood design isn't meeting the neighborhood.
Yes. LED lighting.
That's LED. And I think some creative, I just like the whole vibe of it. I think it's going to be a really interesting neighborhood. And of course, it's in a great location. So I like the materials. I think they've done an excellent job. Councilor Clark?
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't going to say anything, but I still would like to see the bridge a little earlier.
Okay, I'm going to contain you to the DP in front of you, Councilor Pryor. I will cut you off if you're off topic. Please stay within. There's a motion on the floor about the development permit, not about the greater project. Please stay on topic.
And the trail system that you have there, it'd be nice if you could hook it down and around to where the proposed bridge is sooner than later.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Very creative, Councilor Pryor. Well done. Well played, sir. Well played. Thank you very much. We are moving on to 8A. Excuse me. I'm on 8A1, correct? First and second reading of the District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw setbacks and cash-in-lieu parking, number 2576. We've got a team in front of us.
I'll close this other presentation. All right, here we go. So good evening, Mayor and Council. We have three district planners before you this evening, Asia, Elaine, and myself, Carrie, to present to you today three proposed bylaws that together make up the downtown zoning amendments. These proposed bylaws are presented for consideration of first and second reading and scheduling of a public hearing. So we'd like to break this presentation up into a few background sections before presenting and summarizing each bylaw for you this evening. We want to highlight and honor the downtown visioning work that our community has engaged in over the last 20 years, as well as highlight the recent community engagement work we did over the last year, because both have shaped the new and improved bylaws we are presenting to you this evening. So the downtown visioning process took off with the Squamish 2000 plan. This plan was amalgamated into the Downtown Squamish Concept Plan of 2005. This plan was in partnership with Smart Growth and included several community engagement events and design charrettes. This visionary work was intended to become a policy as part of the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. The work for this began in 2006 with several different iterations throughout the years. The one we refer to today is the final version of 2014. This piece of policy has never been adopted and was remained a draft for guiding development in the downtown core. Following 2014, a number of other plans that incorporated the downtown were adopted. They include the Employment Land Strategy and the Active Transportation Plan. Today, the new OCP has amalgamated the Downtown Neighborhood Plan into Downtown Development Permit Area Guidelines and Land Use Policy to integrate years of community visioning work into one guiding document. The guiding plans of 2000 to present day have all been reviewed to create the implementation objectives of today's downtown zoning amendments. You can find reference to all of the related policy for each bylaw in Appendix A. So this comprehensive downtown zoning amendment project arose from the 2016-17 zoning bylaw update, which was originally proposed amendments relating to the downtown setbacks and commercial space, as well as building height on Cleveland Avenue. This bylaw, which was Bylaw 2513, downtown commercial and setbacks, proposed to require employment space at ground level along all frontages in the downtown commercial C4 and artisan village C10 zones, and also an additional story of the building other than the first. So to a minimum depth of 10 meters. The purpose of this amendment was to increase employment space downtown to foster local employment. The bylaw also proposed to increase front setbacks in the C4 and C10 zones for properties fronting along Pemberton Avenue, Victoria Street, Vancouver Street, and 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue from 0 meters to 2.5 meters to allow for widened streetscapes and improved pedestrian spaces. We proposed to maintain buildable area. The rear setback was proposed to be reduced by an equal amount. Lastly, Cleveland Commercial Heights was proposed to decrease the maximum height permitted in the C4 zone for properties fronting Cleveland Avenue to 10 meters or 2 stories to support the preservation of the downtown core as Squamish's main commercial and shopping area. So staff brought these original amendments forward in the winter of 2016-17, and strong public concern and confusion was voiced at the public hearing, and the amendments were rescinded. Staff have taken the past year to revisit the objectives of these amendments, seeking public consultation and council direction every step of the way. So our first community workshop was held in spring of 2017, with approximately 50 members of the public participating in roundtable discussion sessions. This workshop focused primarily on setbacks and employment space. A downtown zoning changes survey ran from May 4th to May 23rd, 2017, with 177 responses received. Summer was dedicated to reviewing public input to develop revised and new zoning options. Staff consulted with architectural professionals to review employment space feasibility, as well as Cleveland upper story setbacks and floor area ratio objectives. Presentations were made to both council and our advisory design panel at each step of the process to gain further comments and direction. We hosted a second workshop where approximately 40 members of the public participated in breakout group discussions. This was the first community engagement event at which the Cleveland character-related zoning changes were discussed in detail. In November, we hosted a third community workshop dedicated to Cleveland character-related zoning changes. 2 members of the public attended this one. So overall, the intent of the proposed downtown zoning changes project is to support the implementation of the collective vision of downtown Squamish in line with the guiding principles of 2000 to the engagement of 2017. The goals of these amendments are as follows: enhance downtown streetscapes and increase pedestrian and cyclist safety, create equitable cash-in-lieu regulations, secure employment space to meet long-term demand, and maintain the Main Street character of Cleveland Avenue. The map in attachment 1 highlights clearly which properties are affected by each bylaw. Now we'll shift the presentation into talking about each bylaw amendment. So in the first rezoning in 2016, setbacks were initially proposed for 5 streets downtown. The initial proposal was in line with 2005 concept plan vision, which are seen in these images here above, and we're in line with the recently adopted active transportation plan at the time. New information around the downtown truck route study and existing 25-meter right-of-way on Main Street were taken into consideration, and the first community workshop proposed only 2.5-meter setbacks on 3 streets, which were Pemberton Avenue, 3rd Avenue, and 2nd Avenue. The survey after the first workshop asked the public the question that given we have limited existing street width, which direction do you most support for the core downtown streets of Pemberton, 2nd and 3rd? The majority of respondents were in support of changing building setbacks, while others did not support building setbacks, with 22% preferring to maintain 2 lanes of parking with no trees and narrow sidewalks, while the other 21% supported losing a lane of parking to accommodate wider sidewalks and street trees. The survey and workshop then broke down every street into key streetscape elements and asked the community to prioritize the elements for each street. Streetscape elements included wide sidewalks, bike lanes, or separated bike lanes, trees and furnishing zones, parking on both sides of the street, pedestrian and cycling safety, curb bulges, and mid-block crossings. Parking on both sides of the road, pedestrians and cyclists, safety curb bulges, and the tree furnishing zone were the consistent top 3 priorities for each street. In general, differences between each street were minimal, with some key findings noted in previous presentations. So, the workshop 2 highlighted revised setbacks changes in line with this community feedback that we received and was generally well received. The 3rd Avenue proposed to maintain the 2.5 meter setback, and this was due to the fact that it's a safe routes to school, it is separated bike lane on the active transportation plan, there were no hydro poles in the laneway, and largely, the area is largely still undeveloped. For 2nd Avenue, the proposal was to not have any setbacks. And so this was because we wanted, we designed it to remove the bike lanes, and considering that 3rd Avenue was sufficient for bike traffic, designed to accommodate one and we have made sure that the design can accommodate one in the future. There were hydro poles in one of the laneways, and the street is intended to prioritize pedestrian movement. So we wanted to reduce the amount of pavement and the crossing width that they have to cross the street. The proposal for Pemberton Avenue is to reduce the setback from 2.5 meters to 1.5 meter setback. And this was to make sure that we have enough space for key cycling connections. We designed it to accommodate existing buildings and infrastructure and the transit stop that's already currently on there. And we wanted to maintain enough space for vehicle turning radius and increase space for potential new truck route. So in sum, the Bylaw 2576 setback section proposes amendments for only properties along 3rd Avenue and Pemberton Avenue. And the subsequent laneway setback is to ensure that most properties will not lose buildable area. For Cash-in-lieu, the most popular topics discussed in the workshops and that we heard in the survey as well was to maintain or increase parking downtown and to develop a central parking garage downtown. We therefore felt it was necessary to also include something around cash-in-lieu and parking regulations as part of these bylaw amendments. The proposal is for 3 different sections. One is to amend the cash-in-lieu map area to provide equality between Cleveland Avenue and the other commercial core streets, to increase the amount of eligible cash-in-lieu spaces, to increase by 1 space for every 1 commercial space provided on site, and that is to help incentivize employment space in the downtown, and to maintain the unlimited commercial cash-in-lieu that was previously on Cleveland Avenue, and just to maintain that for the smaller lots, which we believe was the intention of that regulation. So now I will pass it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Carrie.
To finish up the other sections.
Yeah, so now we're going to switch topics and discuss employment space, which is the proposed amendment bylaw 2577. I'm going to start with a couple graphs that summarize the key employment space findings from the May survey and from the community workshop. So in this first chart, we see that the majority of the survey respondents agreed that we should increase the amount of employment space downtown to meet long-term demand. And then in the second graph, we see that just over half of the survey respondents supported requiring employment space, while less than a quarter of respondents wanted to incentivize employment space, and even less respondents wanted to let the market dictate supply. Through the community workshop and survey, we frequently heard about the need for flexibility in the employment space requirements, as well as the need for better data around downtown commercial employment space demand, This was also a commonly heard remark in the workshop. So based on this feedback from the community, as well as from ADP and from council, we developed a flexible option that would require a percentage of the building's floor area to be developed with employment space. The location and configuration of the employment space would be left up to the owner or the developer to decide. So specifically, 20% of a building's gross floor area would be developed as employment space. And this requirement would apply for any new development in the C4 zone. So the intent of this amendment is to assist in securing employment space to meet long-term demand and foster our local employment. A percentage-based approach would allow for design flexibility while helping to achieve this goal. This amendment bylaw would increase the supply of employment space and promote downtown Squamish as the core of our community, which is in line with the vision for downtown. To determine what percentage of employment space should be applied, we reviewed the amount of space included in recent downtown developments to determine what is feasible. And we landed on 20% requirement, as this is close to the percentage amount that's seen in developments that have proposed second-story office space to date. The employment land strategy was also reviewed. The strategy's supply-demand projections assume that development would follow the use and the building types specified in the downtown neighborhood plan. Recent downtown developments are not following the downtown neighborhood plan, and there's significantly less commercial space being built than what was envisioned in the plan. The 20% amount attempts to create a space requirement that is more in line with the downtown neighborhood plan and the employment land strategy. So as well, recent commercial space gap analysis that was completed by our Economic Development Department found that the supply of commercial space in Squamish will be insufficient under both medium and high growth scenarios, even with the proposed 20% amount factored in. So considering this, staff are recommending that the employment space bylaw, and specifically the 20% amount, be reviewed regularly. So now I'm going to switch to our final topic, which is Cleveland character. I'm going to start with a little back history here. The omnibus zoning amendment that was brought forward at the beginning of this year that proposed the 2-story height limit. After this public hearing in which the community voiced their strong concerns about this, we explored the topic of Cleveland height further with council and with ADP, and an awareness emerged that the underlying goal of the proposed height reduction is actually to sustain the character of Squamish's main shopping street. So based on this awareness, we developed a suite of approaches to maintaining Cleveland Avenue character. The public feedback on these approaches was sought at the second community workshop in October, and based on this public input, we refined these concepts into solid proposals, and again brought these forward for public review at the dedicated Cleveland Character Open House that was held in November. And unfortunately, this was not well attended by the public, and at this stage in the process, staff are bringing forward the suite of amendments that will support the goal of retaining the character on Cleveland. So the proposed Cleveland character amendments would apply to C4 zone properties fronting Cleveland Avenue between Pemberton and Main Street. So these properties are highlighted blue in the above map. And now I'm going to jump into the first of the 3 proposed amendments. So the first amendment is to step back the upper stories of new buildings from Cleveland to reduce the impact of taller buildings on the street. The maximum height in the C4 zone would remain at 6 stories, but the intent is that the upper stories would not be visible to somebody standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, so that the feel of the street would remain similar to the current scale. So to achieve this stepping back, we created an angled front setback, which would be measured from the edge of the Cleveland Avenue sidewalk. So this is shown in the diagram above, and no portion of the building would extend beyond this setback, which is the red dotted line. So the intent of this amendment is to maintain the existing scale and Main Street feel along Cleveland, while still accommodating taller buildings and new development by shifting the upper story massing towards the rear or back of the property. The very specific angled setback limits the exposure of the upper stories from the perspective of someone standing on the sidewalk. An angled setback would also help to retain view corridors to the north and to the south. And the setback will also allow for more sunlight to reach the street level. reducing the amount of shading of our public realm, as shown in the examples here. These shade studies are for the spring and fall solstice, and they show the difference in amount of shading of Cleveland Avenue in the morning, which is the top two diagrams, and then in the afternoon, which is the bottom two diagrams. And on the left is with the setback, and on the right is no setback. So here are a few local examples of stepping back and loading the massing towards the rear of the lot. The first example is a proposed infill development on Cleveland Avenue, which retains the existing retail building that fronts on Cleveland and adds a 4-story addition at the rear of the lot on Loggers Lane. The second example is the Centerpoint development on 4th Ave, and this features 2 stories of office space fronting 4th Ave and 5 stories of residential development in the rear lane. From many vantage points along 4th Avenue, this 5-story residential portion is not visible. And we brought in some other examples of stepping back. These are from Whistler and around Vancouver. And the City of Vancouver has applied an angled setback in many of their commercial zones, mostly to retain access to sunlight at the street level, but also for view corridor protection. And I think these examples demonstrate the wide range of architectural design that's possible with a setback. So moving on, the second proposed amendment is to set a maximum frontage width for new commercial units that would reflect the historical lot pattern of Cleveland. And this is seen in the original subdivision plan, which is shown for downtown Squamish here. The width of each individual commercial unit located at street grade is proposed to be a maximum of 16 meters, which is approximately 50 feet. And setting the maximum width of these individual commercial units would maintain, again, the existing Main Street character of Cleveland and preserve this historical lot pattern. The new narrow commercial units would align with existing businesses and position Cleveland Avenue as a unique shopping destination, supporting tourism and fostering local employment and small businesses. We think this amendment helps solidify Cleveland Avenue's current identity, which is comprised of small-scale, unique, mom-and-pop type shops, and limit the presence of large chain stores, which helps to create a compact, vibrant, pedestrian-friendly environment. So now I'm going to pass it on to Elaine, and she's going to discuss the final amendment in the suite of the Cleveland character proposals.
Thanks, Asia. So yeah, the third element of the Cleveland character bylaw would be that a maximum density is proposed to be introduced to the 3 Cleveland Avenue blocks between Pemberton Avenue and Main Street, as was shown on the map that Asia had on the screen. So currently the zoning allows for a 6-story height and a 0 lot line, and we are seeing applications that fully build this space out. So a maximum density would preserve the Main Street small-scale character that we've been talking about by creating a variety of forms and height, resulting in architectural interest. It would keep the scale of development in these few blocks relatively lower, which has been the vision for the commercial core of Cleveland since at least 2000, as was discussed earlier by Carrie. So essentially, it would maintain the small-scale shops, it would keep some views, and it would minimize shading on public spaces while encouraging residential density and redevelopment. It would make the building design flexible so that a design can shift the massing on a lot to where it will have the least negative impact. Technically speaking, FAR is the amount of gross floor area of a building divided by the area of the lot, so it's a measure of density. And it's important to note that there are exclusions to FAR, which I'll mention again in a slide or two, and so parking is a big one that's not included in FAR, and neither are common areas such as hallways, stairways, and mechanical rooms. So what is proposed is a different FAR number for different sized lots. The FAR that is shown in these images on the screen relate to those numbers. So the top 2 buildings show what is achievable with an FAR of 2.25 on a small lot. The middle ones show an FAR of 2 on a medium-sized lot, and those bottom ones show an FAR of 1.75 on a large lot. And those numbers there are in meters, but for anybody square foot inclined, the small lot is basically 6,000 square feet or less. The medium is 6,000 to 20,000, and we're considering the large over 20,000 square meters. So those images, the blue is showing that 20% commercial requirement that's being proposed. The orange is a residential above, and the gray is that parkade that is excluded, or the surface parking as it were. So for the benefit of the public, and in order to understand and envision FAR, we're going to present some examples that are from Squamish for each of those lot sizes. So the proposed FAR on the small lot size is 2.25, and Asia had this image earlier in this presentation. That's that proposal we've seen for a 4-story infill behind 2-story existing. That's on quite a small lot. That's a 3,000 square foot lot, and that's an FAR of 2.1. One of the councillors might recognize the second project, but it's a proposal that's not on Cleveland, it's on 2nd Avenue. So that's a 6,000 square foot lot. That's got quite a low FAR, 1.45, but that parking is removed from the FAR, and that's a 3-story building, not a 4-story. So with a higher FAR number, a bigger building would be achieved. So the medium lot size, this is where we see that parking. So the FAR number decreases with the larger lot size, and that's in consideration of that parking that gets excluded. So the larger lot sizes can accommodate, in some cases, a 2nd story of parking with a ramp. And so here are 2 examples. They're on the smaller scale of that medium size. So the proposed FAR of 2, these are both examples showing 2.2. The top one is a building that is still in a review stage, showing 4 stories infill on Cleveland on a 7,500 square foot lot. And Cleveland Gardens, which is currently in construction, that one is 4 stories on a 10,000 square foot lot. And so the larger lot size is anything bigger than 20,000 square feet, proposed FAR of 1.75. We don't have an example that's right at that number. We have some that are less and some that are more to give the public and council an idea. So the teardrop, as we see it, and I believe it's coming to council in January, has an FAR proposed of 1.5. That's 6 stories on a big lot of 7,000 square feet. Sirocco, when we take into account just the land size and the building, so not the water or the float homes, has an FAR of 1.57, and it has a fair amount of open space. And then the main is in construction also with an FAR of 2.69, and that's more of the 6-story zero lot type of a build out. So this is the recently developed downtown open spaces plan for the Cleveland Commercial Core. This plan has been included in the draft OCP in the Development Permit Area Guidelines section. And so redevelopment on Cleveland is subject to those DP guidelines, which speak to avoiding shading public open spaces and taking views into consideration. So between introducing FAR density regulations as well as applications adhering to DP area guidelines, which speak to the shade and the views, building design should respond to its specific context by moving that building massing around to where it'll have the least negative impact. And so that's our presentation, and we welcome questions. Thank you.
Questions from council, Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. The 20% I have concerns about the 20% not being enough. You already said that you recognize that when we have build-out, these buildings actually provide build-out on Cleveland and in the downtown area. Reviewing it after it's already built and it's too late and we need more employment space, these buildings last 100 years. So my concern is not addressing the appropriate amount of space right up front and saying that after X amount of build-out, which is measurable in the plan, that we have adequate space for the build-out, or is it that we build one building a year? I'm not sure how we.
How did we arrive at 20%? What are the pros and cons of higher or lower? Is that fair enough, Councillor Chabelle?
Sure, as well, does live with on that exact same measurement, if a proponent proposes live workspace, does that count as employment space?
Okay, yeah, I can speak to both of them.
Great, thank you.
So Mayor Heinzman, through you. How we landed on the 20%, this slide kind of summarizes, we looked at all of the development going on downtown and the stuff that was proposing a second story of office space or second story employment space was falling within that high teens, 20s mark. We weren't really seeing anything except for the MUD 2 proposal on 3rd Ave, which has yet to be approved or
Adopted.
I believe it's on the agenda this evening.
But regardless, most of them were not able to make it above that mark. And further, the feedback we've received from some of the development community is that anything over 30% actually dramatically shifts the financing of the project, and they're unlikely to get good financing if it's over 30%. So we wanted to start at 20% and then be flexible to adjust it from there. And then the second part of your question was the analysis that was done about the supply of commercial. And that looked at Squamish as a whole. And so we do have some other areas that are going to be commercial around the Garibaldi village area and along Tantalus, and potentially up at the university. And some of these areas haven't been incorporated into the modeling that our ACDEV team did. So there's opportunity in other places, not just downtown. Yeah.
And just the work live? How's the work live calibrated?
Yeah, I think we spoke to this in a previous council report that was brought in September, but we're really struggling with live work right now, in that it's challenging to keep it as work. It tends to shift to 100% live. Yeah.
So it's not, the question is though, is it being evaluated as part of the 20%?
No.
No. Is that fair, Mr. Schwab?
Yes. So it's just commercial spaces.
It actually includes
comments after.
Comments after. We're just getting clarification questions. Yeah.
Can I speak to that further? Yeah. So the way we set up the actual amendment bylaw is that it excludes, the 20% excludes residential and parking, but kind of allows all the other things that are allowed to occur in C4, which includes institutional, educational, other uses.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, and then Councillor Blackman will follow.
Councillor Chappelle's comments about the 20%. Part of the reason we want more employment space downtown is that it's not just retail, but that we end up with office. So what forces or provides the opportunity for some of that commercial space to not be on the ground floor? Because in large lots, that 20% could all fit on the ground floor.
Yes, if I may. Again, parking is often will be the incentive to try and squeeze that commercial space. So in order to make more parking, especially ramping up, in order to put second story parking, and that's what we've seen before, is people are proposing that second floor commercial so that the commercial on the first floor can be also smaller to accommodate ramping and drive aisles for the parking in the back, especially on smaller lots, on the medium-sized lots. But it's true that on the bigger lots, we're likely to see all of that commercial space on one level.
So it's more likely that we'll see second floor office on medium and small lots, and none in the larger lots, which is a bit of a shame actually, because for larger companies that want more space, they would want to look at those larger blocks.
Absolutely, but we've also heard from the community that, and from the design community that, they appreciate the flexibility and not the original approach, which we did propose 2 stories of commercial. And we've got some feedback with regards to that, we're still responding to what we heard from the public.
Okay, and then also related to that, in the staff report, it says, recent downtown developments are not following the downtown neighborhood plan, with significantly less commercial space being built. The 20% amount attempts to create a commercial space requirement that is better aligned with the downtown neighborhood plan amounts. So what were those amounts?
So the amounts that were the assumptions used in the employment land strategy, which they said were based on downtown neighborhood plan, were floor area ratio instead of gross floor area, and the floor area ratios were in the range of 0.45 to 0.55. So basically 45% of a lot or 55% of a lot. And that's what the employment land strategy used as their assumption for their modeling. Does that?
So I know we were trying to capture the spirit of all these old plans and move them into 2017. But there's a big discrepancy between 45% and 20%.
Yeah, so the
how do we
45%,
make that justification in terms of our evolution of things?
and it's tough to convert floor area ratio to gross floor area. So 20% could work out to actually be about 45% if you have multiple stories of a building. But maybe that's something we need to bring to demonstrate further. But it is more in line.
Carrie, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I just want to add one more piece to that in line with what Jonas was saying around parking. The downtown neighborhood plan didn't envision that we had to have surface parking or second level parking. They had talked about underground parking and the availability of that, which given our flood, given our water table, that is not a viable option. So some of those designs didn't actually take that into consideration. But I think we're trying to bring this to present day what we can develop.
You've got more? We'll go to Councillor Bracken. Questions?
Yes, 2 things to start. I wonder if you could speak with the rationale to defining the boundaries, and I'm wondering particularly why we didn't, I know it kind of came up in earlier conversations on previous meetings, why we didn't go all the way to Vancouver Street, and why did we stop at Main Street? It seems like an odd place. What was the rationale for that? And then secondly, what was the rationale for these floor area ratios? They seem a little high to me, given the fact that we have all of these parking issues. And so I'm wondering what the rationale for that is, and if, we might want to consider, and if maybe you saw from other jurisdictions, like, Nelson, Baker Street, and those places, what was the common FAR for new builds as opposed to legacies?
So I'll try and answer the first question, which was why did it stop at Main Street and not go down to Vancouver Street? And that's because a lot of these amendments, especially related to employment and the density, are directly related to the C4 zone, which there aren't any more parcels when you go past Main Street that are not already spoken to in terms of development in the C4 zone. There's one, the main property, which is already being developed, and then there's the Pac West site, which has a different zoning and it has to go through its own zoning amendment. So we're trying to capture those properties that are basically at development permit ready stage.
So, can I just elaborate? If theoretically, if the Pac West site was to go for a C4 rezoning, if they're outside this zone, they don't have to comply with the regulations. Do they not? They would have different C4 regulations.
I can speak.
Sure.
Yeah, so our intent is that they meet the proposals here. Through the rezoning, it's discretionary for council, so we're pushing those principles for that Pac West site.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. That was sort of what I was hoping. And just because it makes sense, because that's where the grain of the grid kind of breaks down after Vancouver Street, and it'll be all different after that. So, and then just the FAR question. Like, was there any consideration to just lowering the FAR completely to a much lower level to?
So to clarify the question, you said that they seem high considering parking, like considering accommodating parking. So these are maximum FAR numbers, and certainly the parking requirements would, they'd have to meet the parking requirements, so they might not be able to meet these FARs in doing that. But these were arrived at. It was a sort of a right sizing exercise of similar to Asia's table that she showed. We have a similar table that has FARs of a number of developments downtown that we've looked at, and we looked at what seemed like reasonable amounts, and then we tested it with these images that you see on the screen that took into account some of these setbacks, and that these are accurate of the required amount of parking that would go into these example buildings, and that's really what it was.
I'll just go to councillors who haven't had an opportunity to ask a question if they have one. Let's say Councillor Chappelle, I know you have another, and Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I still,
Question.
yeah, it's the 20% still, and we're just gonna get ground floor commercial, so I'm just wondering if staff have, and also with the integration, I know that you can have commercial on all floors. With the FAR, how does the FAR integrate with the 20% and 6 floors and parking on these small lots? Like I can't work out any commercial happening with parking requirements and the FAR. So I'm just wondering how it integrates with, I really like the setbacks. I think that's excellent work with shadowing and everything. I appreciate actually having it in our policy at the setbacks, but I'm confused as to how, even in your examples, it's all ground floor, half space commercial lots, which are useless.
So through you, Mayor, I just want to clarify the first point around the commercial only ground floor. That was in some of the diagrams that we've seen, but when we look at the actual developments that have been proposed through this chart here, you can see that the percentages, the buildings that are actually achieving the 20%, and you can see the Mud 2, the Pac West, and the Victoria Street in its original design, which had, all of these had second story commercial. So actually to achieve anything higher than the 20% on these lots, they had to go to the second floor. So we are seeing that, and with the hope is that by having this 20%, that we will see buildings with second story office or second story employment space. So I just want to clarify that.
Buildings already in, when you go to that list, buildings already in the hopper don't have to comply with this.
Unless some of those permits will never happen, which is a likelihood, that a portion of those permits will never go ahead, and at that point, they will be revisited
So
again.
Is it for our entire, so it's just for one section of Cleveland Avenue? Can you go back to, is there a map of where these go down?
And so these employment proposed changes are for all of C4, not just on Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Elliott.
I'm still trying to, can you go to your picture of the Nelson Street Estate? Okay. So you give examples of sort of maintaining character of a historical street front, but then the FARs proposed would change ours drastically by adding height, quite a bit of height, at least 3 to 4 stories even on the small lots. Whereas I don't see any of that on Mackenzie Avenue or Baker Street, at least in this view. I haven't been there recently. And so I suppose, along with Council Black and Wolf, I'm wondering about the FAR and how high we really want our streetscape. Because that says to me, that's 2 stories, as an example of maintaining good character.
Through you.
But here, it shows an angle all the way up to 6 stories. Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Heinzman, the FARs that we are proposing would provide buildings in the range of 4 stories. And so if the intent is to maintain 2 stories, then those FARs are higher than that.
Okay, So in looking at the examples from previous plans, back to 2000, Cleveland was contemplated as 2 stories with an option to density bonusing or whatever and step backs to perhaps go to 4. And suddenly now we have C4 zoning, which is no setbacks and 6 stories. I'm not quite sure. I lived here long enough to understand how we got there. And now it seems we're trying to move back from that. So yeah, I'm just trying to understand how we are trying to represent the past with today.
Jonas, you want to delegate
Sure.
who you want to talk on that one?
I will start on it if I can. If I don't get it right, please correct me. And that was the original proposal we brought forward to council, was to establish a temporary 2-story maximum in Cleveland until we figure things out. What we've heard subsequent to that meeting from the community, from the design panel, was that it is important to maintain that fine-grained character of Cleveland, but it's also important to maintain the development viability so that some of those properties can redevelop. And so that's what we're aiming to do. We're aiming to keep the commercial character of a 2-story building when you're standing in front of it, and allow for some density to happen behind it. And downtown is an area where our policy directs densification. So we're trying to strike a balance, but you could go either way. You could argue that it is a historical street and that 2-story limit should be maintained. We're trying to balance it with the public feedback we receive.
I guess finally this phrase in the staff plan that makes me a little bit nervous is the angled setback will allow for more sunlight to reach the street level, reduces the amount of shading on the common realm. I know we have that new schedule in the OCP for more open space downtown. And then it says it may retain or open up views to the north. But our community, I think, said that they want to try and maintain those views, and we're asking developers to do view studies and the impact on views. And so I'm still a bit concerned that FAR is a bit high in order to do all of those things.
Yes, I mean, we haven't done a professional level view analysis off of downtown, and that's, I think, in a maybe medium term, that is necessary. What we do know about Cleveland is that it is really well aligned with the views to the north, which is Garibaldi, and I think the setbacks proposed here will address those views. I mean, it's hard to see even with a flat up building to the street that the view would be extinguished from the streetscape. But you're right, we need more analysis on the viewscapes. We're trying to come up with a fairly comprehensive solution. We know it's not ideal. We know we have the zoning that doesn't work downtown, so we're trying to come up with something that fills the hole fairly well, but there will be opportunities in the future to come back and tweak things, and I think the update of the zoning bylaw is going to be our next opportunity to look at maybe employment space and more detailed analysis of the viewscapes on Cleveland.
Councillor Pryor,
Thank you. Well, viability is a big one because there's a lot of old buildings on Cleveland Avenue that if they were given 2 stories or nothing would do nothing. And I'd like you to pull up those pictures of and we showed some of those ones on Cleveland, the one that's going 4 stories in the backside, right there. You can see the little white building on the top left-hand side. That's actually being constructed. See that one, Karen, on the left side there? So that's 4 stories at the back and 2 stories at the front. So, and that's on a 25-foot lot. And then you had some other
And
photos.
just to clarify, what's that FAR?
I believe that one's 2.1.
2.1 or something? 2.1.
And then
And it would, these current rules would allow it to be 2.
I'm just, kind of talking about I mean, that's a good example because that's holding that, I mean, it's an A example. I mean, a lot of people would love to tear their buildings down because they're just not a functioning building, But you also had some pictures that you showed in Vancouver, and you showed some pictures of the setbacks in Vancouver, the setbacks on the floors. Not that one. It showed a couple of 4-story thin buildings. There, the middle one there.
Yeah.
And you see there, yeah, the little white one with the setbacks there. See, that's what I envision. And if you review the comments in the ADP, like the ADP, they envision Cleveland like that. Vibrant, lots of people, lots of new buildings. You don't envision it, like the way it is. And so I just don't want us to, focus too much on trying to save some of those crappy old buildings.
I think that's what planning articulated in the rationale. So just to maybe put a fine point on what Councilor Pryor's getting at is that white building that he's talking about. I hate to do this to you, but what is that FAR, if you were to guess?
I honestly couldn't take a guess at it. We don't know the parking that's going on in the back of that building.
If you show your modeling, the little models you have.
Yep. Further,
I bet you it's higher than what's proposed.
Vancouver calculates their floor area ratio different than us. I think
3 stories, not 4.
they include parking.
I think so, yeah. We have a fairly unique definition of floor area ratio from our other jurisdictions in that it excludes a lot more things than in other places.
And they might not have parking requirements in other places too.
That's true.
It's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor Blackman-Wolf.
So, I don't know, I mean, I guess it's kind of a philosophical question. I mean, if we have lots of empty storefronts on downtown and, vacant buildings and all of that, I might be more willing to consider the idea that, we need aggressive change. But, I mean, this is a fully tenanted block, for the most part. And I mean, to me, my personal opinion on it is that the mistake was that we should never have included, back in the day, they never should have included residential in the C4 zone. It should not have been in there in the first place. And I think what's happened is some, folks have bought empty lots under the assumption that they're getting a whack of residential, and we're basically saying, okay, well, at least just give us 20% on commercial, and they use that as a loss, loss leader. And is that what we want? Do we want to encourage that in the rest of the areas? I mean, maybe, I don't know. I mean, there's other options. I mean, it could be just a straight up commercial zone, and that land will trade at different values than what a residential zone value would. But, that's something to be considered, and it's, one special project that we had with the loading on the back, that was interesting. I don't think we'll get a lot of those. I think it'll be a lot different. There'll be some consolidation, and my concern is that actually, even just not the viewscapes from to Garibaldi, but, you know, Chief, and those areas around it, that I think that once you block that in, that will definitely change the character of Cleveland. So, you know, we have to determine if that's something we want in order to get 20% space on, and that would be net new space on empty lots that are redeveloping. And, or do we want to consider some things that maybe there's other options, because some of these commercial buildings, the 2-story buildings, their FAR is actually 2, but it's because they don't have parking on site. So maybe we just say, well, for this block, we allow FAR 2, but you don't need to do parking, and you could just do a 2-story simple building, no elevators, nothing like that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's commercial development, maybe it isn't. So that's sort of the way I see it, and I see where planning is going, because we do have C4 in lots of other parts, and I think it really works well in all of the other sort of C4 areas, but I'm still concerned about the Pemberton to Vancouver particularly. So.
There was a question in there that I thought needed clarification, and then I was listening so intently to it. You're saying I forgot what the question was. But there was something that I thought you should comment on in there.
What I heard is that there's a philosophical question whether Cleveland should have any residential to it, or whether it should stay a purely commercial district. Is that? And there's a really good point to that question. That's not what we heard when we had the first bylaw come forward. You know, we had a very strong reaction to that bylaw. I suggest that we can continue having this conversation. This is the first step to kind of just put a stop to all of this development permits coming through with all Cleveland and elsewhere. And we can continue this project and just narrow down onto Cleveland from here. But I think it's important to fill the current gap in the C4 zone. But it doesn't mean that that will be it.
Thanks. Yeah, I've always had a philosophical problem with C4 zoning because it did destroy our commercial core. Basically, it allowed residential speculation, which basically eliminated all desire for commercial space and allowed, it just basically stopped all the comprehensive buildings. So the C4 zoning, you know, although I recognize the need for people on the street and that more density, you know, like there's that philosophical argument about are you going to get commercial buildings if you're just in a residential market? It's a very, very difficult conversation to have with people who own the buildings and now recognize the value has gone up. And you look at Vancouver, commercial spaces are being destroyed by the residential value and speculation. So the same is happening up here. So I could see the value in what would happen is we wouldn't get any new commercial space. That's what would happen. So we have to ensure that this, with some residential to make it viable for developers to actually build, has enough commercial space in it. I would say raise 20% and it'll be viable someday. So maybe we raise 20% and require more commercial because it's a commercial area on that block of Cleveland. And then in other areas where there's C4 zoning, like on 2nd and 3rd, further abroad, then maybe keep it 20%. Cleveland's challenging for parking. Maybe if there's more commercial, like maybe we get better parking leniencies just in that Cleveland block, and then we raise the commercial to 30% and give parking leniency, and then that allows for more commercial density. Keep the 6 floors so you can put some eyes on the street, and also increase, you know, businesses like having people around because it allows for. But we have certainly, you know, as far as view corridors, we built on all our employment land downtown, residential with no commercial, like all the way down Line Channel. There is deep density, very high buildings with very little commercial ground floor space, and the one building with no commercial space. So it's that's really, it is, and I wouldn't mind continuing the conversation. My question is alleyways and pedestrian areas. Like I don't see the alleyways treated as pedestrian spaces or for people spaces. You have walkways and pedestrian alleyways and stuff in built buildings, but the alleyways in between the spaces aren't really addressed in there. Or are the green lines, Victoria?
Maybe,
So the
Yes,
purpose,
thank
just
you.
want to clarify, the purpose for these proposed cross sections is for developments as they come through to provide those walkways. We
Permeability.
already have the laneways, and the district owns those laneways. We can set a certain standard to those laneways. So I think this was more about securing those access points through the property.
Okay,
so, we actually have, 4 or 5 different bylaws that we're considering in this whole thing. Obviously, the Cleveland Avenue FAR height is a big discussion that's going to happen. I don't want to lose these other ones in the conversation. So I'm wondering if council will allow me to we'll focus in them sequentially, have questions about them sequentially, vote on them sequentially, and then move on to the next, just so we can make sure we're giving due mindfulness to all of the bylaws. Is that all right with you guys? So I'm going to focus in on the first one. That's the setbacks and cash-in-lieu parking. There's a recommended motion that it be given first 2 readings. Council has the option to do 1, 2, or both. And there may be different reasons to consider that, but I just want to outline that. Councillor Pryor. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Schell. Councillor Pryor, would you like to speak to the motion?
Well, I mean, we just saw the presentation and I liked all the photos and it's second reading.
Goes to public hearing. Yeah. Anyone want to speak against this bylaw? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of first and second reading? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move on to, and that the public hearing be scheduled for January 9th. Maybe we'll do, all the public hearings are anticipated to be on the same day.
Yes.
So we'll do that motion right at the end, if that's all right. Council may on some of them decide there needs to be more deliberation time between the second and public hearing, but we'll get there. So we'll just do the first and second readings first. The next one is the employment space, and there's a recommended motion that it be give first and second readings. Anyone want to move that? Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Pryor. Councillor Race, do you want to speak, please?
Yeah, and I heard the comments from fellow councillors about whether that should perhaps be higher, and maybe, I guess, is the answer to that. It could be higher. But I think this is not a bad first step. And the staff mentioned it's the kind of thing that zoning bylaws to me are living things, and we can change them anytime. So if we see things not developing the way we like, we can come back and revisit this. But I think this is a fair first step. So at second reading before public hearing, I'm prepared to support it at this point to continue on in the process.
Thanks. It's getting there, and it's first and second reading, and I appreciate all the work staff has done on this, trying to get some employment space in downtown. My biggest fear is that we're going to have the same thing. We'll have a rush on development, and we'll have a whole bunch of people that will get their applications in before we have a chance to actually amend anything, and then we get a whole bunch of buildings with very little employment space, and then, because it's not like we have extensive land to, we're talking about a few blocks here that is our only, but I was going to say our only, but if we are willing to consider other zoning for other areas.
Just a reminder, this is first and second reading.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
If we're looking at other areas for employment now and opening it up outside the downtown, then I think this is fine, and as Councillor Ray says, it's fluid, and as long as we keep an eye on how many applications are coming in, then I'm willing to support first and second reading and listen to the public ones.
Councillor Elliott.
I don't mind this one. I'm a little bit hesitant because of the next bylaw, which is the height one, and I think the two go hand in hand. And I almost feel feel like we should give this one first reading and the next one first reading so that we have an opportunity to have a little bit more discussion on them, because I don't think you can separate them in my mind. So I think the 20% is a really good start. It's just that if I put forward an amendment to just do first reading on the height and maintain the character of Cleveland Avenue, I feel like this one will be part of that. So if we send it on ahead to public hearing, it's different.
Yeah, you can ask to separate out the vote, to have a vote on first and separately. Can you do that? Or would you have to defeat it and then just do first?
No, there could be an amendment to just consider first reading.
Could you not separate it into two motions? I see your hand, Councillor Chappell. Separate it into one motion being first reading, one motion being second reading? Can you split the motions? I'll let you think, good.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it would have to be considered first.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm going to speak to it briefly, and then I've got Councillor Chappell. I was of the same mind as Councillor Elliott. I see a possibility of these being tied together, and on one side of my mind's going, it may be too complicated to do this. The other side of my mind's going, well, I have three sides, so I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but another side of my mind is saying, there could be positive unintended consequences, and the other side saying there could be negative. But my thought is, for example, maybe we want to set a lower FAR. However, if you achieve a 30% office, you get a bigger FAR. And so there's a way to incentivize it. So I think that's what my mind is going in terms of seeing those two pieces of the bylaws connected. And maybe there's an integration of both of those bylaws, as opposed to separate bylaws. But I'm willing to consider first reading in order to get it to. So can the chair just say, I've separated the motions into two motions?
I think it's better to do an amendment and consider first reading.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Well, if you want the friendly amendment to just reduce it to first reading, if the seconder goes along with it, because I don't disagree. The two can go hand in hand. If it looks like the next one is probably going to go to first reading, then we might as well just have the two of them go together.
I believe Councillor Pryor was the seconder amenable to just doing first reading.
I mean, I'll agree, but I remember when this came to us in a meeting, and we filled City Hall with people complaining about just going the 2 stories, and I think staff did a good job of bringing us middle of the road. And I don't know, I mean,
The interesting thing about what happened was, it was first and second reading or consideration of, we filled the room with property owners.
yes.
We never got to public hearing, which is where the public would show up, and there may be very much a different opinion than property owners showing up. And both are valid in this conversation, obviously. So first and second reading, the public often doesn't show up because they're not aware of it. We didn't get to public hearing. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks. I'm going to point out that the entire first half of this presentation was all the public engagement that staff has done on this. Staff has done multiple meetings. They presented the setbacks, and the public has agreed to this. I'm going to go with the public showing up at all the meetings and the extensive amount of work that has been done on this. And the viewscapes and the setbacks at the angles, I think, is a great idea. We've already approved taller buildings on the channel.
Just to clarify, the motion on the floor is first reading of the 20%.
Yeah, why not do 2 readings and get it to a place where we can actually
You
hear
can move
from the
second
public, and then
reading?
you turn it down in second.
You can move second reading after we've done first reading. That's your problem.
Do I have to agree to first reading?
Well, for a friendly amendment.
For a friendly amendment, otherwise an amendment would be put on the floor and we vote on the amendment. If it's a friendly amendment, you're not friendly. Okay, would you like to put forward an amendment?
Don't we have to follow through with that?
Nope, we don't. There's been an amendment put on the floor that we only consider first reading and take off second reading off the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Blackman-Wolf. Councillor Elliott on the amendment, please.
Speak to my amendment. So the reason I want to do this is because I don't want to pull back from all the engagement that staff has done. But also, only 2 people showed up for the engagement around this height piece. So that's not a lot of public input. And what I'm not saying is limit to 2 stories. What I am saying is let's explore the relationship between commercial space, which we do want to encourage, and if we can link the FAR, as the mayor said, to get a more creative solution here with that, while maintaining streetscape, but making sure we get the commercial space that we really want and need. And so I'm just asking for space between first and second reading to see if there's some more public input between those 2 things and opportunities for us to adjust before second reading. So,
Sorry, go on.
yeah, so it's not taking away from the engagement. Staff have done a great job, and I was at several of those meetings to hear the feedback myself. So I just still have some concerns that I'm not comfortable setting this to the public hearing.
The distance between first and second reading allows for staff to take into consideration comments from council. So maybe I'll just go to Carrie quickly.
I just wanted to
On the amendment.
Yes, I wanted to clarify one point that was said, that we only had 2 people engaged on this topic. The second workshop, which had approximately 40 people engaged, the Cleveland character and the FAR was discussed at that meeting too. So I just want to clarify that it was brought to 2 different meetings, not just one.
Yes. Okay. On the amendment.
On the amendment, yeah,
Speaking for or against the amendment.
I think that actually is a good idea for discussing the relationship between the commercial and, I will.
Okay, I'm going to call the question on the amendment, which just for clarification is to drop the second reading part of the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Friendly unanimously. So there's a motion on the floor that we give this first reading. Unless I see another hand, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Next up is the bylaw amendment employments. Oh, that was one we just did, right? Nope, the second one, number 2577. Oh no, that was the. I'm sorry, I'm just.
2578.
2578. Upper story setbacks on Cleveland and frontage on Cleveland. Councillor Elliott.
I would like to move first reading. I don't think there's a lot right with what staff have proposed, and I would just like a little bit of extra time to have some more dialogue.
Okay, you can speak to it once the motion is seconded. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Chappelle. Have you just spoken to it, Councillor Elliott? Anyone else like to speak to first reading? Yeah, I'll speak to the first reading. I think there's lots of good input and possibility here. I still have some reservations about pieces of it. I still think that there can be a connection with the employment space. I'm not convinced the FARs are going to achieve the results we want, and so I think there's a bit more input and deliberation from staff that need to go into second reading. So I'll support first reading. Anyone else? We'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Did we do all 3? Was there 3? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Next up. We will get there eventually.
Public hearing.
Oh, yeah, that's right, I'm sorry. So we have one issue. Should we go to public hearing on that one thing? Or should we hold back and do them all at once?
I would say that it makes sense to put them all together, because we're probably talking, a couple of weeks. We'll try to bring for these changes that we've discussed, we'll try and bring a second reading in early January, and then at that point we can schedule a public hearing for.
Okay, so we won't schedule a public hearing at the moment.
I would suggest not.
Okay. Next up, we have District and Zoning Bylaw number 28/2011, 1606 Scott Crescent, number 2546, 2017. And this is second reading and consideration of the public hearing date. Does council want to have a few minute break? How are you doing?
Get her done.
All right.
I made a smaller one this time. Second reading. So Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton, planner here at the District of Squamish, presenting today a rezoning for Amendment Bylaw 2546, 2017 for property located at 1606 Scott Crescent for second reading. This rezoning application is proposing two things: to rezone the 1606 Scott Crescent C3 property to the existing and adjacent CD77 zone, also known as the Scott Crescent development. Two, make the required revisions to the existing CD77 zone and the associated land development agreement to accommodate the addition of 1606 property. As this rezoning is proposing to integrate into the existing CD77 zone and Scott Crescent development, I took some time at first reading to recognize the long history this development has had with Squamish Council and our community. This detailed summary of this history can be found in attachment 3. The rezoning and integration of the C3 property into the CD77 would include these 5 prominent changes: the addition of 10 residential units and a residential area increase to 36,929 meters squared from the original proposed 36,000 meters squared. It would allow for a larger amenity common area for the whole CD77 development. The proposal also secures a minimum of 929 meters squared of commercial space, as only a maximum was proposed in the original 2014 CD77 zone, and would not have secured any neighborhood commercial in this development. The secured commercial space ensures no net loss of commercial in the area with the rezoning of 1606 Scott Crescent. A new addition at second reading is that this proposal will now also secure 4 lock-off suites, as recommended by the Upper Mamquam Blind Channel Land Use Study and Policy Statement of 2012. This is to pursue attainable housing in the area. The lock-off suites would assist in providing affordable housing options, both in terms of making the larger townhouses more accessible with a mortgage helper, and by providing a small rental suite on the market. One change from first reading is that this reading proposes a minor change to the allowable uses in the zone. The secondary suite use in the 2014 zone will be replaced with a multi-use flex use to align with this evening's potential adoption to the secondary suite definition changes in the zoning bylaw. This change will uphold the intention of the secondary suite use in 2014, so nothing really changes with that, it's just a name change. The developer is offering to provide a community amenity contribution in line with the recent CAC interim policy target amounts. The proposed development addition would generate a target amount of $60,000 based on 10,000 additional square feet of residential space. The allocation includes 80% to affordable housing and 20% to general amenities. As requested in first reading, second reading provides an overview of the amenity package agreed to in 2014. This table highlights both the amenity benefits package as well as the works benefits package. It also shows that the amenity package exceeds the voluntary community amenity contribution targets of 2014. The rezoning of the Scott Crescent area in 2014 was accompanied by an extensive land development agreement that highlighted all the details of the amenity benefits package and works benefits package, as well as open space and trail dedications. At second reading, staff have provided council with a high-level overview to the changes being considered to the land development agreement as part of this rezoning. These changes help to bring this LDA created in 2014 up to current standards and takes into consideration new development connections, new best practices, and our new policies. The revisions also include some trail improvements in response to public information meeting feedback. The project was posted to the district's development showcase in June of 2017. A public information meeting was voluntarily held on July 6th, and 3 comments from the public were presented to council at first reading. 17 more comments have been received since, including a letter from support from the Squamish Trail Society, and all of these can be found in attachment 4. All 20 public comments express unanimous support for this development. Rezoning or public notification procedures will be undertaken should council confirm the public hearing. With the addition of lock-off suites, this rezoning application is now aligned with 7 official community plan policies, 7 2014 draft downtown neighborhood plan policies, and now fully aligned with the Upper Van Blind Channel study. A detailed overview can be found in attachment 1 of these policies that have been updated since first reading. Recommendations from staff is that council approve the following resolutions and provide a public hearing date for February 13th, 2018.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Elliott?
Is there a covenant on the lock-off suite to make them affordable? Because you can have a lock-off suite and still rent it for $1,300, which would be affordable.
Through you, Mayor, there's not a covenant to protect that from the lock-off suites.
So we've created a mortgage helper for the townhouse owners, but not necessarily affordable housing.
That's correct. This development is paying in lieu of affordable housing contribution because of the addition to the rezoning is of such a scale that it works in line with our CAC policy that's currently in place and that's likely to come forward, that small scale rezonings pay cash in lieu rather than provide the units on site. So this is similar to the waterfront landing example where the lock-up suites, by the nature of their size, will likely be more affordable than a larger unit.
Follow up. I mean, that assumption is false because people are complaining in our town that they can't afford even a one-bedroom apartment. So we can't assume that just because they're small, they'll be affordable.
Currently, there's no covenant on it. No. Wow, that's clear. Any questions for staff? Anyone want to put forward a recommended motion? Moved by Councillor Pryor that we give second reading and that the public hearing date is January 9th at 6 p.m. at the 55 Activity Center, seconded by Councillor
No.
February 13th.
Was I reading the wrong one? I was. February 13th here in Council Chambers. Is there a reason why it's so far up?
I think it had to do with just scheduling in terms of,
But we don't have a public hearing on the 9th anymore. Is it worth considering January 9th?
we could, I won't be there.
I will.
I actually, at this point, in terms of getting a report to you in time, we won't be able to put a report together to make that date. It would have to be, just because due to the holidays, we need a number of weeks in advance to get a report through to council. And
How would the report differ from what we're seeing in front of us?
There
We
would
just
be.
have so many public hearings
Yes. No.
at the end
I
of January.
I
We're gonna
understand.
have to do this other one. I just trying to be efficient here.
Mayor Heinzman, we do have strict deadlines, but I'll go to staff. I'm just thinking.
We had the same deadlines for the 3 that we've not now planned a public hearing for.
That's true. It
I
means that
won't
we
finish.
would we would try and rush through an ad. That's one of the considerations, that we have a minimum time period to put an ad in the paper. And so if we know there's a scheduling of public hearing coming up, we have the ad ready to go. And right after the council meeting the next day, we can put that in the paper. So it will be a bit of a stretch for us to try and pull this together.
Sorry, I cut you off.
That's okay,
Apologies.
Mayor Hanson. Notwithstanding the ad issue, I was going to say that I would enable, a change in deadline for me if staff thought they could get the report in time for the night.
What's the difference?
But I'm also hearing the public notice could be an issue.
Councillor Pryor, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, I don't mind if it's January, doesn't bother me. Well, there's holidays and everybody's doing stuff. and-
No, the recommendation was February 13th.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I'm asking if, because we do not have the other public hearing planned for the 9th, that we can move it up, and staff is responding. And that's great that you're okay with it.
And I'll speak to first and second reading when we get a chance to.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to clarify the motion, if that's all right. Can we get it for the 9th? Yes or no?
It will be a stretch, we can try. We're about to hit the holiday period, and we have to write a report, put an ad together, put mailing lists out, and make it all happen before the end of this week. It's possible, but I don't know if we can guarantee that we can make that happen.
You're not writing the other reports?
We're not, but we've written all the ads for that public hearing. So we will be pulling that and trying to put a new ad together. So we can probably do it.
Maybe I look to Shar. Can we put a motion forward that says public hearing to be scheduled for January 9th, if not able, alternate February 13th? Can we do that? We just have literally like 5 weeks of public hearings now. January to February with the OCP and a number of others, so I'm just trying to.
I think we need to be, they need to know whether they're doing these ads or not tomorrow, so I think we need to make a decision.
We also may have more opening space in the January agenda as well that we can review. I believe there's multiple.
We have to make a motion that sets
Yeah.
the public hearing, so that's the challenge. It could come back on the 9th and then set it for 2 weeks down the road.
It could go on the 16th if we don't think it's going to be.
Okay, we could put it on the 16th.
That would be better.
Okay. So who moved that?
Council Pryor, I don't know if it was seconded.
I was seconded.
Seconded by Councillor Chappelle, that we give it second reading and schedule a public hearing for the 16th of January. Does that work, Councillor Pryor?
Yeah.
Councillor Pryor, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, just really looking forward to seeing this one
Remember, you've got to wait for
fill
the
in
public
that
hearing.
hole and give us all those nice trails over there.
Just remind council that they have to maintain an open mind prior to the public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this?
Well, I was at first having trouble supporting it, and now they have some commercial in there, so I'm
To go to public hearing.
public hearing. Yes, exactly, like supporting it at all, to move forward.
Thank you. I'll speak to it briefly. I think it's certainly at a point where I can consider it going to public hearing. You look back on some of this and how we allowed a development so close to downtown without any guarantee of commercial is disappointing. However, we'll see what the public has to say, but I look forward to hearing about their opinion on the 16th. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. That was a little painful. I'm sorry about that. Adoption in front of council is the secondary suites amendment. If anyone wants to move adoption, moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's the District Zoning Bylaw 2000, the tobacconist amendment, 2576 to 2017. Is there a mover for the adoption? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Accessory kitchen amendment, number 2568. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Electric vehicle charging amendment number 2569, moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. And Cash-in-lieu CD2 amendment.
Gesundheit. Can I just speak to the last one? Just wondering if staff got any feedback on the 30% versus the 20%?
Could you elaborate a little bit more?
We changed the
Oh, no, we have not had any feedback.
Moving on, Cash-in-lieu CD2 amendments be adopted. Number 2570, moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2571, DPA 2 and 7 Move adoption, moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Next up is number 2575, fees and charges bylaw. Move adoption, moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Reyes. All those in favor, just saying if you're paying attention. Opposed, motion carries. And 37762 3rd Avenue, that the mayor and corporate officer execute the land development agreement as attached to the report from the community planning department, and that the zoning bylaw be adopted.
Mayor Heinzman, I'm in conflict on this.
Thank you. Why is that?
I own the adjoining property.
Thank you. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Councillor Chappelle?
No, I think this is a really novel use of zoning. It pretty much includes everything. I was looking at it saying, yeah, you can pretty much do anything in that zone. I think it's fantastic. I'd like to see more of this spread through the community. I think the use of commercial to be innovative with zoning really allows businesses flexibility in the choice of spaces. So I'm happy to move this and support it, or support Doug's movement.
Yeah, I'll speak briefly. We've spoken to this before, third reading, but it took us a while to get here, but I think kudos to the developer, kudos to the community for collaborating on coming up with quite a unique zone. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Kent, can you get Councillor Pryor?
Yes.
Thank you. On to 9A1, community planning infrastructure. There's a referral from the SLRD with regard to their amendment bylaw, their RGS amendment bylaw. Jonas, you want to speak to this?
Sure. So in front of you is a referral from the regional district, the Squamish Regional District. It's an amendment, a major amendment to the RGS. It has been in front of council previously at a June meeting where council passed a resolution to support the major amendment process route of this amendment, and that District of Squamish has no further comment on the proposed amendments to focus development into compact, complete, sustainable communities as contained in the SLRD's proposed bylaw. This bylaw does three things. It replaces some of the language in the RGS with respect to growth management, and it now would state that the growth management policies would direct growth and settlement development towards member municipalities and existing SLRD master plan communities. Secondly, it would limit development within existing SLRD master plan communities, in that further growth is not supported beyond what is currently contemplated in the SLRD official community plans, and would also contain language referring to new master plan communities and/or urban areas that are not supported outside of the established settlement area. So that would also apply to member municipalities as well as the electoral areas. And finally, it would remove the destination resort language from the RGS bylaw. And there has been some comments made in that earlier today that some of these amendments would limit or reduce the local autonomy that the District of Squamish has. However, what is important to consider here is the regional context statements, which are essentially the level of subscription that each municipality commits to the regional growth strategy. Our regional context statement is different than the other municipalities in the regional district. Each one of them is different. It's essentially the link between the official community plan and the regional growth strategy. Our regional context statement does not have any maps in it. It does not have a settlement map in it. What it says is that we will generally follow the growth management policies of the RGS. And that means that we do have autonomy to make decisions as long as they're not major decisions with respect to the settlement planning within the District of Squamish, even if it falls outside of the settlement areas as contained in the RGS. So that's, when it comes to local autonomy, is the regional context statement that's more important than the regional growth strategy. It states how the district implements the regional growth strategy into its OCP. So I would suggest that the proposed changes do not reduce the level of local autonomy, but it does remove that expectation that resorts outside of the existing settlement areas are supported, or that there is a path forward. Today, if Garibaldi at Squamish or any other resort came in and wanted to establish within the regional district, it would have to go through a major amendment. After these amendments pass, it will still have to go through a major amendment. So it doesn't reduce, the current requirements within the RGS are no lesser than they will be once this RGS amendment is passed. And the reason why the regional district is undertaking these amendments now is that it is legislated to review the RGS every 5 years. And it's trying to clarify and strengthen the policies of the RGS that speak to compact growth within each community. Some of the other things, so this is going to be one RGS amendment out of what perhaps would be 2 amendments. There's another one following up that deals with other parts of the RGS. One of the things that the steering committee has been working on is making sure that there is clarity, and on our behalf, we've been working at establishing some language in the RGS that will say that regional context statements do not have to contain maps. So that will, I think, improve the level of local autonomy that we will have, because the regional board will have an expectation that the next time the Squamish submits its regional context statement, it will be specifically stated in the RGS that none of the context statements have to have a map. Some might, and some may not. It'll just be up to each local authority.
Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Carter.
Yeah,
Question from
thank you.
Councillor.
Thanks, Jonas. And you were here and heard the statements earlier about the potential wording, the resort clause being taken out may hamper that project moving forward. I mean, and you're saying it won't make any difference?
I don't believe it would make any difference. First, the proponents for that development haven't applied for an amendment to the RGS yet, so they're not there yet. If this language stays in place, let's say Squamish does not accept this amendment and it either goes through an arbitration process or it does not get adopted, that development will still go through the major amendment process and will still be subject to the discretion of the regional board to the same level that it would be today if the language around resorts was in place.
So if the language around resorts stayed in and everything else stayed the same, would that make any difference to us? Would that make any difference to all the other aspects of the regional growth strategy? I mean, so that clause is in the regional growth strategy. Leave it in there, what difference does it make to the rest of the document?
So are we talking only about the resort language or the rest of this amendment as well?
Well, the whole document has, they're excluding Garibaldi and Squamish.
And, or any resort, it's not
Or any
specific.
resort.
Yeah.
So let's say they leave that language in like Garibaldi and Squamish has requested, but we leave that language in because they feel as though it's going to slow them down, it's going to add another layer. I mean, this is what they feel, another layer of bureaucracy, I guess. What if we just left that language in? Would that affect all the other stuff, or would everything else be fine?
So, like I said, the proposal would still have to go for a major amendment process, which would be subject to all the same level of approval that's necessary. What the regional district is trying to do is remove the expectation that if you consider all of these things, you will get an approval, and strengthen the language around compact communities and channeling all of the growth into member municipal areas. So the language is more clear in this amendment than otherwise contained in the RGS at the moment.
Talks about the committee. I wonder who's on that committee. Patty, do you know who's on?
Steering committee?
Yeah.
Yes, so it's made up of staff from each jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So it's planning staff from the District of Squamish, it's myself and Matt Gunn. You know, each
Every
municipality
every
provides their
municipality
own.
and the
Good
SLRD staff.
guys.
Yes,
Good guys. Okay, then, the other thing is public consultation. You know, I heard one guy get up and say, we heard nothing about this. So, and you know, which kind of surprises me, and in some ways, I have trouble with the SLRD because SLRD has 2 councillors and a couple backups on it. And they represent themselves, they don't represent council. So we have a mayor and our councillor on that committee that represent their own thinking. You know, and so when it comes to public consultation on something this big, and I mean, I support Garibaldi and Squamish, and I know some people don't. Why is there not more public consultation on something like this?
Can you go over what the legislated public consultation is and what was done? And there was also elected officials forums that talked about how to move the process forward too. So there was multiple aspects of this, so maybe.
yes.
And when I say elected officials forums, it's every councillor and every regional director in the SLRD can go to these. And
That's
it's
right.
not a ratifying vote, it's more of a consensus vote.
Yes, so we did have an elected officials forum and everyone was invited to attend the forum, which is where these amendments were confirmed around the tables. There was consensus that from all of the
I think there was
jurisdictions.
unanimity, I was on the phone for that one, but there was unanimity.
I believe so.
I wasn't on the phone for that one.
You had the choice to be on the phone for that one. You had the choice to come in person.
I believe the regional district, in terms of legislative authority, they need to have a public hearing, and they've held a public hearing, and they've heard from the Squamish Nation in formal letter, and they've heard from the proponent for Garibaldi at Squamish.
And from the Lilwat Nation.
That's right, and from Lilwat
I
Nation.
think some other nations up in the northern part. remember.
Those are the 3 that that I'm aware of, and there was another citizen that also spoke up
And
at
are
that
all
meeting.
3 nations opposing
Pardon me?
this wording? I know the Squamish Nation doesn't support this. Do the other 2 nations support it?
I believe the Lilwat Nation clarified that that they defer to the Squamish Nation.
Just to clarify, within the regional district, there's 8 or 10, there's a lot of different First Nations, so it's not just consultation with one nation, it's consultation with many.
That's right.
But just to clarify, it's not like our relationship with Squamish Nation.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the revised revisions on Garibaldi and Squamish apparently are coming, and I don't know.
This is about the RGS.
Yeah.
The Garibaldi at Squamish has inputted into the RGS, but just to clarify, this is about the RGS. I've got Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Blackman Wolf.
Thanks. So I've contemplated this quite a bit today, just looking and you know, I came in being absolutely against because
Just to clarify, there is no motion on the floor.
I know.
We're just
But
trying to get
against the
clarification.
amendments on
Clarification questions. I'm trying to focus in on questions so
direct
people have their
growth and
answers.
settlement development towards member municipalities and existing SLRD master plan communities. But the bigger question I have, I guess, is before the wording was significant future growth will be accommodated in these communities, and now it's changed to further growth is not supported and new master plan communities and urban areas are not supported outside establishment areas. As we grow, if we need to take in land, like we can't really, I think about the amount of accommodation that we are already having to do with densification. We're gonna at some point have to go further beyond our boundaries, and who knows how fast that's gonna happen with population change, but I worry that our decision-making is gonna be usurped by SLRD board.
So, just to clarify, RTS is similar to have, it's like a 20-year horizon like an OCP.
Yep.
Just, it frames it, it's not in perpetuity, it frames it within a context, is that
So
correct?
why wouldn't it be, significant for the growth will be accommodated? That seems like a reasonable thing to do. But to say that significant regional growth will not be supported and has to go through amendments and all.
Well, I think it's the RCS that is the key, and also the every 5-year review period that is important to consider.
Just to clarify, the RCS is the regional context.
Regional context statement, yes. And so our current regional context statement says that we will generally follow these policies, which means that we don't, if there was a development that came forward that was outside of the settlement area, that there is a level of consideration before it gets to a major development that the district can consider and approve without going to SLRD for approval.
So if we're moving into, if we want to take in land or apply for land, we don't have to go through the RGS.
Any boundary expansion or settlement area expansion would have to go through the RGS, yes.
Yes.
Even though the statement is going from significant future growth will be accommodated in these communities to
She's off. Yeah.
new master plan communities are not supported.
Go ahead.
Just for clarification, master plan communities means something like Britannia or Furry Creek. It doesn't refer to Squamish or Whistler or Pemberton or Willow. Not the definition. So what they're talking about, and we saw it in Britannia, where somebody came along with a proposal to rezone lands for 3,000 units, and the OCP only permitted 1,000 units. And the SLRD took the position that 1,000 was in the OCP, and that was it. But don't confuse master plan communities with Squamish. We're not.
Okay, so it doesn't affect Squamish at all.
That statement does not affect
Does
Squamish.
not
If
affect
we have
Squamish at all.
significant growth, it doesn't affect Squamish at all. And
I
and settlement.
need to clarify, it does, I believe it does affect Squamish.
Can you clarify how?
Yes, so new master plan communities and or urban areas. Urban areas are already identified in our settlement maps, and that's majority of our existing area. And what essentially happens is every 5 years, when the RGS gets updated, which is what we're going through right now, we go to the regional district and everybody gets an opportunity to provide a new growth area or revise their master, their settlement area boundaries. So every 5 years we get an opportunity to update our settlement planning maps, and then with our regional context statements, there is flexibility for local autonomy. But the statement that says that no master plan communities does apply to Squamish as well, and that would include major developments.
If it's outside of our settlement area.
That's right.
But if it's inside of a settlement area, it's fine.
It's fine, and even if it's contiguous with our existing settlement area, there's even a bigger case to say that it's generally compliant with policies, and we wouldn't seek an amendment to the RGS.
So our settlement area and not having maps in the RGS is where that rubber hits the road. Is that fair enough?
Yes, in the RCS, in the regional context statement, not having a map is important for us.
And I think the flip side is that this language is intended to actually protect the existing communities. That's actually the intention behind it, is that we don't have these porto codes and all these things popping up in random places from Willouette to Britannia Beach or south, without going through a due process of the RGS. It's not intended to minimize growth within, it's actually intended to focus growth within the settlement areas of existing municipalities. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
So Quest University was not contiguous with our, Quest University is a perfect example. So
Before the RGS.
it was before the RGS, but would not be supported by the RGS.
And
And
you want to explain this again?
Well, I was going to wait until the motion went on the floor. So,
Can we do that?
yeah, I mean, I was going to wait for questions, so.
Yeah, I wanted to get questions answered, so, I'll let Councillor.
And I'm also
raise-
concerned about the public process, but if.
And that, well, that's a valid concern, and we'll hold on for that question.
Yeah.
And that's relevant to your decision making. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one of the speakers mentioned that in 2009, when I got on council, one of the first debates we had was around the RGS. And Squamish did not support the draft of the RGS. And it went through a process. We had an elected officials forum, hashed out the differences, but the issue was around local autonomy. And the example used at that time was Quest University, which wasn't contemplated in our OCP. And if Quest University came up when we had the proposed RGS framework, the possibility is another community that was competing with us could have somehow vetoed it, and veto is the wrong word, but stood in the way of it. And so the wording in the RGS was changed, and the wording in the RGS increased local autonomy. And arguably, you can take one view, and that is that the regional growth strategy has no impact on development, it is not triggered by development within our municipal boundaries. So there's a whole, I'll wait until the motion's on the floor, but whether or not this applies to Garibaldi and Squamish, but keep in mind Garibaldi and Squamish is at the moment approximately 90% of proposed development outside of Squamish's municipal boundaries. So different scenario, it's not inside Squamish. I hope that clarifies it. But I think the autonomy issue is resolved in 2010.
Was the fight we had 7 years ago. We need to move on. We have other speakers. We can come back to you. Councillor Elliott and Councillor Blackman Wolf and Councillor Pryor.
Well, I know there were statements tonight that somehow people have more control over decisions, or that there was a veto, but my understanding is that there is no veto in the SLRD. People can vote against it, but then it goes to arbitration. So
Correct.
if there's
That's
no
correct.
clarify that for the record, that no community has a veto over any other community. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a formal arbitration process that would have to follow.
Any clarification questions, Councillor Blackman?
I was just going to clarify for Councillor Race, or Councillor Pryor, that he might have not seen there is actually a letter from the Lilwat Nation, and I'll quote from it. It says, "The Lilwat Nation was not properly consulted in the regional growth strategy when it was originally developed in 2008. As a result, the regional growth strategy as a whole remains an outstanding issue for the Lilwat Nation. We are therefore not in a position to provide any comments on the proposed amendment."
And that was in your package. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know. We get big packages. Now, I heard someone say, and I think Councillor Race, you said this, that if the land is maybe known as adjoining our boundary, then it's a different rules around that. When you say if it was part like touching our boundary, 10% is in our boundary, 90% is out. So does that give it any special, like let's say we get a presentation next year and it's really wonderful and we all want to move forward with something. Because it's touching our boundary, does that give us any advantage? Does that?
No, it would have to go for a major amendment today, and it would have to go for a major amendment after these changes happen.
Okay, Councillor Spell, do you have a question?
On the autonomy, the paragraph that concerns me the most is the direct growth and settlement development towards member municipalities. That statement seems to remove autonomy for me. If I read that statement, it would say that all our growth basically has to go through member municipalities. It says that right there. Direct growth and settlement development towards member municipalities and existing master plan communities.
So that is, in fact, I think a good growth management tool for the regional district. Regional districts generally want to stay in rural and support that resource base. And so this policy applies to lands in the regional district that say, we will direct most of the growth into municipalities so that densification happens in municipalities and the rural resource land base stays in the regional district.
So it's not directing policy to be
No,
looked at by
no.
Absolutely not.
municipalities, it's directing settlement and growth towards member municipalities.
Exactly. It's a really good thing from a municipal
It's a
perspective.
geographic statement, not a
Yes.
philosophical statement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Clarifies that. And can I just make the statement about policy?
we don't have a motion on the floor, so I prefer not to make statements yet.
Not a statement, but I'm just wondering if all the nations, I know that the Squamish and the Willowa nations were not well consulted. Is that a fair statement? And about the public consultation that was brought up earlier tonight, I'm concerned that our public really has no idea that this is going on right now. I haven't heard anything in the community. I've had nobody, except for people that were concerned that they just heard about this and it's Christmas. Even though it has been on the table, and yes, there's been public meetings in Pemberton.
So, if I may,
It concerns me.
the Lilwat Nation, as Councillor Blackman Wolf just read, said the initial RGS, they were not public, they were not consulted. So we're talking 7-8 years ago. They were not consulted properly. So because really the new RGS is very similar to the old RGS, they don't support it. The Squamish Nation were sent a letter in, and there was multiple requests by the SLRD to meet, to present, to collaborate on the RGS. And as is their right, the nation chose not to engage in that consultation.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure, at least I know that other nations were similarly, there was an attempt to consult. And they chose not to engage in it, is my understanding. And that's their prerogative not to. I'm not judging that at all, but that's their prerogative. I don't believe, and then this is where people get confused, the OCP issue that happened in Whistler, because it's a resort municipality, it needs an order, and because of the land development agreement or something, it needs an order in council to get approval, and that's where the legal issue came up that stymied Whistler's OCP. Our OCP, the regional growth strategies around the province don't need an order in council, and so the similar legal action the Squamish Nation took with the Whistler OCP does not apply to the RGS or our OCP as the legislation is currently written, correct?
That is correct. The province does not sign off on the RGS or the OCPs outside of the resort municipalities.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yes.
Does that answer your question about engagement with First Nations? It doesn't maybe not satisfy your question, but it answers it, that there was an attempt made and it was rebuffed.
Does not satisfy me, but thank you.
So at this point, I think we've had all the questions. I don't see any more hands. Is there anyone who wishes to move this motion? Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Councillor Race, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess a lot of what I might have said was already said, but to put it into context, because of some of the statements that come up, the regional growth strategy for me was primarily aimed at the unincorporated areas, and that was sort of the difficulty we had when I came onto council back in 2008, 2009, when we started that debate with them, because instead of dealing with the sprawl, and keep in mind, if you go back a little bit in history, they had just rezoned Porteau, which is 1,200 units out in the middle of nowhere, and they just rezoned Wedgwood, which is a couple of hundred more units to the north of Whistler. And so they were starting to get into this highway sprawl thing, and the regional growth strategy, from my perspective, was designed to stop that. And so, and when they say direct growth to municipalities, what they're talking about is getting rid of highway sprawl. And so when the Montessori school wanted to move to Wedgwood, that triggered the regional growth strategy. When it was outside, it was sort of in a very small way adding to urban sprawl and not what was desired. And so primarily it was intended to control things popping up between the municipalities. The municipalities all had pretty tight OCPs dealing with growth and smart growth in the ground and so forth. It was the unincorporated areas that were kind of at odds and at loose ends, and so that to me was the main thrust of the regional growth strategy. And so when it started to sort of dip into municipal autonomy issues, as the original draft tried to, that generated the fight. And other municipalities sort of picked up the ball and also ran with it. And so we, as a, got consensus at an elected representatives meeting, I'll always trip over that one. And that resulted in an arbitration, which was practically a consent arbitration. It changed the draft of the regional growth strategy. We went to third reading, that was adopted. And so it left it with, from my perspective, municipalities within their municipal boundaries have significant, if not almost entire, autonomy at the end of the day. Nobody really has a vote. I know one speaker said somebody can veto it. Whistler's been on record as being opposed to this particular development, Garibaldi at Squamish, since I think practically the mid-90s, not triggered by a recent change in ownership or anything. They've been that way for a long time, consistently. That's their position. If this came to a regional growth strategy vote as a major amendment, and one affected party votes against it, it's not a veto. The ministry staff made that very clear to us. All it does is send it off to arbitration. And arbitration has a winner and a loser and could go either way, depending on the circumstances of that particular application. So I think that's important. There's nothing here that in this amendment that affects Squamish's autonomy one way or the other. The regional growth strategy is going to govern any destination resort proposal, whether it's Garibaldi, Squamish, Joffrey, or anything else that might pop up anywhere in the regional district. Particularly Garibaldi and Squamish, because at the moment it's mostly in the regional district. They are the regulatory authority at the moment. So they will have not only regional growth strategy issue, they will also have the basic zoning issue with all the public engagement that requires. That will be them. I know there's been talk in the past about the possibility of Squamish extending its boundary and becoming a regulatory authority. That I think at best is speculative. I would say the chances of that happening are way less than 50%. And so more likely at the moment, I would have to venture that the regional district will stay as the regulatory authority. So there will be a zoning issue, an OCP issue, and there will be a regional growth strategy issue that will come to that part. And probably, if that was the case, then it would make more sense for Squamish to pull back its boundaries so that the entire thing is developed under one regulatory scheme, the regional district, as opposed to going the other way.
Now you're getting ahead of yourself.
Yeah, which does require it. So in any event, just to let you know, this amendment does not change that, so I'm happy to support this.
I've got everybody, so I'll go to Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Pryor, Councillor Elliott. There was a hand over here. Vote all of you. Okay.
Thanks. That point on arbitration seems like an awfully complicated process. If one person votes against, it goes to arbitration, is that correct?
In a major amendment, yes.
Yeah, that is prohibitive, and especially if we're removing language that
We have no control over that. That is a provincial legislation.
If we're removing language and it goes to arbitration, if we're removing language that is around destination resorts, the arbitration would go less well for a proponent that's with any destination resort than it would if we had language in the regional growth strategy on that states process for destination resorts. So there's a lot of, I'd like to hear from the public and understand their position on this. I'd like to hear the Squamish public in specific on these amendments and on the resort destination removal of that language, because just one person voting against and going to arbitration and removing language that is specific to all resort destinations really is prohibitive for Squamish.
Or
Because you know that Whistler's going to vote, so you know what's going to arbitration, and now we're removing resort language.
I can't remember who's next. I'm just going to go around the room. Was it Ted next? And then Karen. Okay, Ted and then Karen.
Well, I'm with Susan on that one. It's just such a big thing. You know, Whistler's not supportive. That's been obvious forever, and I have a tendency to maybe disagree with Councilor Reese a little bit on the, will we expand our boundaries or will we not on that? And there's an awful lot of tax money up there, and there's a lot of reasons why Squamish might want to stay in control of zoning and those kind of things. And so I don't think the jury's out on that, and when he said 50%, I thought, well, that's a pretty good number, because that's about the way I see it. I think there's a fairly substantial discussion on that.
Really off topic.
Okay, well, he brought it up, and
He
so,
should.
That was off topic too.
yeah. And just the public comments on it, I don't like, if we could leave the wording in, like resource, blah, blah, blahs, then I could support it. But I would like public input from Squamish, like a public information meeting in Squamish, not elsewhere. And the, in 1995, when this project first came forward, 95 or 89 or whatever it was a huge deal for Squamish. And I think the day will come when it will be again.
That is all relevant conversation. It has very little to do with the RGS that's in front of us.
So
Councillor
I will
Elliott.
be supporting it.
I'm supporting the motion. I think that the SLRD fulfilled all of its requirements to move this forward. There were public information meetings in Squamish. I attended all the elected officials forums. We have two very capable staff on the steering committee, so I'm quite confident that we are not doing anything to give up autonomy. And I think the changes represent smart growth and the desire of our community and others. And I don't want to treat this as a referendum on a project. It's just about clarifying language. It doesn't change the process or move the bar for anybody. So I'm happy to support this.
Councillor Blackman, Wilson, Councillor Kane.
Well, when I first ran for council, I ran on a platform of smart growth, and having, been educated in planning, I think it is really important that we look at how we have growth in the region, which is actually why I find it very odd that we'd want to take out the destination resort language, because the destination resort language, which unfortunately it was just alluded to in the package, but the actual printout, it's 2 pages of the RGS. It actually spells out some very specific reasons and compositions as to what a destination resort is. So it's not a residential sprawl, and it has some very specific indicators as to how that would happen. And I actually think that, in contrast to the way that I think it's being interpreted, and we're all sitting here beating up on staff, I don't think this is a technical issue. It's not a technical issue at all. I would agree that at the end of the day, Squamish retains some rights and whatnot, but it is actually a political decision, and I think we need to have the courage to actually stand up for Squamish, and let's take a look at this project and let's get it done, get it done as far as the review process. I'm not saying that I'm for the project or against the project, but I'm not in favor of throwing up additional artificial barriers. And I'm sorry, but I cannot believe for any moment that I find it very difficult to believe that it's just a coincidence that Whistler is the chair of the SLRD, and there's some close relationships between certain members of council and the mayor of Whistler and the chair. I don't know. It raises some very troubling aspects for me, and I found it very frustrating. And I'll be upfront about this in terms of my discussions with Whistler. Whenever we've met council to council, that's the #1 thing they tell us is we don't want Garibaldi at Squamish. But they don't talk about how they want to be part of the region, and that's their right to do that. But I don't see any need to accommodate Whistler's need to protect their market. And I don't think this is the right way to go about it. And in fact, one might argue that without all of the specific languages, there could be other resorts in the future that get by with very, very less robust consultation. You know, maybe all 4 municipalities are in favor of it, but it's a terrible project, but they don't care because maybe it's not affecting their business. So to me, this is number one, it's a political decision. And I would like to reference the comments of the chair of the SLRD. And this is from the Squamish Peak story that was alluded to by the earlier speaker. And I hadn't seen this before tonight, but this is the chair, Jack Crompton, chair of the SLRD, Whistler councillor. He says, quote, "This amendment doesn't give any direction to how the provincial government proceeds, apart from clarifying the position of local governments." So what is our position as a local government? That's the question that we should be asking today. And when I ask myself that question, my position is that we need to get on with the process. This project has dragged on for way too long for Garibaldi and Squamish. We need to hear from the applicant about the revision. We need to hear from the community about how they feel about that revised project. And let's get on with it. Let's make a decision. Let's have the courage to do it and not hide behind some regional thing. And I don't come to this decision lightly. I mean, I definitely, even coming into this meeting, I wasn't sure, you know, exactly, you know, I could see some of both sides of the argument, but when you look at the actual destination resort language, it's very progressive language. And for us to pull that out of the SLRD regional growth strategy, it doesn't make sense. So I'll be voting against this.
Councillor Kent.
I'll support this. I think it does clarify our position and it protects our community and the region against fall. I think the gas or any other master plan community is going to have to go through this process, the RGS amendment anyway, as you stated. And this allows some closer scrutiny and greater consultation.
Thanks, everyone. I'll make a few comments too. Regardless of whether this moves forward or not at the regional district, and whatever Garibaldi and Squamish does, it will have to go through a major amendment process. So in terms of this decision affecting future processes, I actually don't think it will at all. Those processes are embedded in the legislation the province has set out already, and they're already embedded in the existing RGS, so those will happen regardless. Interestingly, and I think this is a lesson I think that we need to heed when we look at our OCP, is I believe the intention, and I was in the room when this was discussed the first time around, the intention of the language in the RGS was not to say, here's a de facto, you meet these criteria, so there's a de facto approval of any resort. That was certainly not the intention. The intention was to put a lens on what would be things that we would consider should any process move forward. And I think it's a good lesson for us within our OCP that your intention made us put a scope around something. The unintended consequences, Rod said it. He thinks it's an enabling language in there. And that certainly was never the intention of that language in the RGS. And I think my understanding from being at the elected officials forums, from understanding or trying to understand the RGS for the last 7-8 years, is that what's intentional in these things has to be really scrutinized well, because you can actually get the unintended consequence and the expectation that this is actually a tantamount to approval or empowering something. It has to go through the public process anyway. So the intention of this is to focus the conversation on smart growth. The statements in the resort destination essentially are just mimicking or repeating the smart growth principles. There's a whole bunch of things within the language in the resort destination that would shut the door to Garibaldi Squamish right away. Minimal ecological footprint. Pretty easy to argue that that's not going to happen. So, I mean, there's pieces in there already. I actually think it's just cleaner to take the language out. Any resort would go through the public process if the language is in there, if the language isn't in there. There's the language talking about smart growth in there no matter what, and this is what we're trying to focus the RGS on. So I think we've actually, we've used this situation as a political tool, when I think really the essence of what we were going through is the amendment process of the RGS, cleaning up the language of an infantile document, because it really was in its infancy. It was the first iteration it had ever been in. And it will be iterative as it moves along in 5 years once it gets amended again, and in 5 years after that once it gets amended again. It will be further refined, just as we further refine our OCP every year. These are not perfect documents in their essence. They are guidance documents, they are vision documents, and they should not be setting out a blueprint for this type of thing that was set out in this document. So I'm going to support what's in
Clarification.
Mm-hmm.
It says that it requires unanimous support.
I'm going to say it again. It's a major amendment process.
No, but I mean this.
This is a major, we are in a major amendment of the RGS, right? If any municipality does not support it, it goes to arbitration.
So the RDS goes to arbitration if we don't support it.
If we don't support this, it goes to arbitration.
Who arbitrates?
Correct?
That's right.
An arbitrator.
An arbitrator. Just for example, it's the exact same scenario as Garibaldi Squamish comes, and there's a major amendment process in the RGS, and there's Lillooet who says, I don't like it. I think it should be in Lillooet. Whatever, I'm joking a little bit. And there's a member municipality that says they don't like it, they don't support it. It goes to arbitration. We're in the exact same process right now. And that's because the board determined that it should be a major amendment process. Originally, it was because it was just language change. The board was thinking, oh, it's just a minor amendment process. And it was actually Garibaldi Squamish that said, no, it should be a major amendment process, and we agreed.
So no matter what happens, Garibaldi Squamish will have to go through arbitration.
This is not a referendum. This is not a question about Garibaldi Squamish.
Because we won't get support in 5 years. We talked about 5 years.
Regardless of the language, if they keep the language that's in there now or the new language, the Garibaldi Squamish will have to go through a major amendment process in the future, and that's just one of many procedures that they'll have to go through, and they know this. And it was very clear when the ministers gave their conditional certificate to Garibaldi Squamish. They were both very clear, the Ministry of Forests and the Ministry of Environment were very clear that this decision comes down to local government. They were very clear in their articulation of their decisions. So we've known that forever, and I generally agree with Councillor Blackman-Wolf, is at some point it's going to actually hit our tables to go through the process. And whether that's rezoning in the district or rezoning an RGS amendment at the SLRD and OCPEN, those all have to come, no matter what happens in our decision today. Go ahead.
Thanks. But without the language, it's going to go to arbitration. So, and without that, it's going to arbitration.
It's going to arbitration.
100% for sure.
That's what the point that Councillor
It's
Fryer
going to
just made.
arbitration. So,
we support it.
yeah, but without language in it that speaks to resort destinations, it's that much more difficult, and it is completely. I want to read something from the Squamish Nation letter that I probably wouldn't have heard either. Squamish Nation asserts and maintains Aboriginal commercial interests in the Squamish Regional District, and proposed amendments will significantly affect the economic development opportunities in the region for our people. We have to pay attention to our First Nation as well, and respect the decision of the First Nation that they don't support this. That's our First Nation. And when our First Nation doesn't support the amendments, and yes, they have commercial interests, but we support economic development for the First Nations. So, they're going through new processes, they're learning how to develop economic development opportunities in the land that surrounds us, and this makes it more difficult. So I can't support the new wording. It makes it too difficult for the Squamish Nation and any resort, not just gas, that any other proponents to come forward because they're forced to arbitration by commercial interests of another community.
Which they will be regardless of this change or not.
Yes, but the language.
Yeah, no, I hear you,
Right.
that it might,
I
in an
totally agree.
arbitration, be
One
more
arbitration
convincing.
through the process no matter what.
Yes.
And there may be, and I agree with you that it may be other reasons, like ecological reasons, but to be allowed to go through a process by removing language that guarantees that the arbitration is going to be very difficult and a battle is wrong.
Valid
Because
opinion,
it's basing it on community interests that are outside of Squamish, that are completely commercial interests, and now they're American commercial interests.
I think we treaded on areas that perhaps was not fair to the process, but I'll leave it at that. Councillor Buckman-Wolf.
Just a question, I know the applicant's representative mentioned that the applicant was open to a referendum on boundary expansion for their project. And I'm just wondering if staff had considered that.
It's a legislated, so part of boundary expansion has two referendum components. One is a referendum and/or alternate approval process within the municipality proposing the boundary expansion. One is within the population that the boundary is going into. And I believe it's up to the municipality and/or the SLRD, depending on the jurisdiction, to determine if it's an alternate approval process or a referendum. It's not up to Garibaldi and Squamish. This is a provincial, am I getting this correct? Provincial regulations clearly articulate the conditions for which boundary expansion is considered.
So where does it stand then for this project?
It hasn't even come to us. It has not hit any local government's tables to the point where we even, or the SLRD or anybody's even contemplated boundary expansion, let alone all the regulatory processes, which are often years in the making, as well as electoral approval through either referendum or alternate approval process. And the alternate approval is 10% of the electorate. If they want to go to referendum, they can, or the municipality or the local government can say, we're going to go to referendum. So that's not in the proponent's hands. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand that, and not. I was just saying that probably, given that they mentioned that you know, I think that would be actually probably one of the best ways for us as a district to consider that type of thing, and it would seem to me that would actually highly affect.
We're way off topic. We're way off topic, and that there's a talk. We can talk about that in the future when we actually see the proposal. But we're way off topic. We're on the RGS right now. Boundary expansion.
Well,
is nothing
actually,
to do
no,
with it.
because now that we're getting rid of this provision, then the only efficient way to see this project move along the process is going to be to add to our urban containment boundary, in which case, or municipal boundary, in which case the SLRD would have nothing to say about it. Is that not correct?
No. Well, the SLRD still has a process in the boundary expansion. And if there's anyone who actually lives in the boundary expansion area, I think there's only a handful, if any, they would have a referendum process too. But, so there's two potential referendum processes. In our electorate has the ability, and the electorate affected within the Garibaldi at Squamish boundary has an ability as well, in two separate referendums. But they're not related to the RGS.
Well, I'm trying to make a point that because we are doing this amendment to the RGS, and because of the likely outcome of that, which we've explored, that probably the preferred way forward, if I was sitting in the applicant's shoes, would be to go for boundary expansion. And we had already talked about that as a potential thing, you know, at a certain point. And so this was the first time that I heard the referendum question coming up, and given the fact that it is an election year coming up, I don't know what kind of timelines we need to work with, but I just thought I would raise that issue.
Completely another issue that we can talk about at a later date.
Well, I'm just going to,
yeah,
it's on this.
Motion
I've asked this
on the
question twice, but I need to ask it again. So if we don't support this motion, the whole strategy goes to arbitration. right?
This amendment goes to arbitration.
This amendment goes to.
Just this one amendment, not the whole RDS?
No,
Oh. And who does that arbitration?
it would be an appointed arbitrator. Appointed
Okay.
probably by the province.
And that would take the politics out.
It goes to an arbitrator,
Yeah, that would take,
and they take a whole bunch of things into consideration, obviously.
well, that might be a good thing then.
It might be. That's the process, any major amendment process, that may be the end result of it. Okay, I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pryor, Blackman, Wolf, then Chappelle opposed, motion carries. I'm gonna move on. Wastewater treatment plant efficiency feasibility study agreement.
Yeah, that's you.
Like righty.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Did I still your seat here? My name is Ben Konashenko. I'm the Technical Operations Manager for the Public Works Department. And I'm just here to talk to you today about an energy conservation study we're looking at doing in conjunction with BC Hydro, rather funded by BC Hydro. So as kind of a summary, the district's wastewater treatment plant employs 4 75 horsepower blowers. They're kind of the heart of the whole process of the plant, being an aerobic process. 3 of the 4 are 45 years old. The other is about 22 years old. And we're essentially just looking at exploring the possibilities of what other types of technology are out there. Are there more efficient units? And is there a business case for that? We've worked with our key account manager at BC Hydro, and essentially they've agreed to give us some funding to cover the entire cost of the study. So I'm here for you today to ask that the U.S. Council agree in principle to the terms of the BC Hydro Letter of Agreement for energy efficiency study, and that the U.S. Council authorize Mayor and Corporate Officer to execute the agreement.
Excellent. Any questions? Would you like to move it, Councillor Spell? Is there a seconder? I'll second that. I'll call the question unless there's a comment. I think this is great. I'm sorry, getting tired. And thank you for waking up to present. That was good. No, I think this is a great initiative. Good job. I'll call the question. All those in favor, opposed if any, motion carries. You waited all that for that. Good job. Loggers Lane Lighting Tender Award.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I brought a few documents to review on the screen with you, so I'll just get these ready. Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Simmons. I'm the District's Capital Projects Manager. So what I was hoping to do was review the report as it's been presented to you and walk you through a little of the design pieces as well as some of the other components of some of our priorities in active transportation. So the report before you tonight is to award the tender to Capilano Highway Services for this Loggers Lane lighting project in the amount of $384,000. And there's a number of other resolutions that I'll discuss a bit more. But just the background here is that further to March 21st, when we were in council talking about the priorities of active transportation in this year, one of those priorities that we got a resolution on was to proceed with the lighting of the quarter trail from Finch up to the Adventure Center, and while we were there, to put in roadway lighting. We have done that, and our tender has come back a bit higher than we were anticipating, and there's a number of reasons for that, and I'm hoping to kind of run the council through the design so you can get an understanding of what that looks like. So if that's okay with you, I'll get into it. Yeah? Saying yes? Okay. So let's start off with what the fixtures look like. So This is a standard 9-meter pole, so this would be consistent with our bylaw and what we installed on Centennial this year, in the first quarter of this year, when we put the lights from kind of the Centennial Loggers intersection to the underpass back to Government Centennial. And so these are 68 watt LEDs, and these are on a 9-meter pole. And so there are a number of those in this design. What you'll see here is these combo ones where, because the street and the quarter trail are in such close proximity, there's a really good opportunity to light both of them at the same time. So this fixture here, the 9-meter pole, is the same as this, but it's just got a custom davit that just comes off the side that'll light the quarter trail section. These are 34 watt LEDs on the trail section, so that'd be consistent with what we've done in Rose Park. And then these are the 68 watt LEDs, which are consistent with the work that we've done in Centennial. And I'm not sure if you've noticed driving in lately, but when you leave tonight on Cleveland Avenue from Pemberton back to the highway, you'll notice that our staff just retrofitted all of those heads from high pressure sodium to LED as well. So you get an idea of kind of what those looks like. And those are consistent poles to what you'd see here as well. The trail lights themselves, these are consistent with the work that we've done in Rose Park, and so the consistency of that kind of continues to translate from Rose Park up to Brennan Park. Now going back to where we start. So this is the intersection of Finch and the Quarter Trail with the lift station here. So we strategically get across the road to continue this project for the future, which would continue to go down south. I've also got some lighting calcs and some concept designs from Finch down to Adventure Center that I have, that if there's time and you want to see, I can share those with you as well. So you can see these, as we look through here, you can see these are the combinations. So there's 11 of these combination filters, fixtures where we've got the trail really close to the road. And one of the challenges for us in this area is that we've got a ton of underground infrastructure, but we've also still got the leftover hydro poles with the old communications on it. So in order for us to proceed, and because we felt that this was one opportunity to go through here and do this all, we're taking those down and we're undergrounding that. So if you know on the section sheets of that, you'll notice there's a number of 4-inch conduits there, and that's us working with Shaw and TELUS in order to underground these and remove these poles. Because the last thing we want to do is have a pole every 50 meters with a daisy chain of old wooden hydro poles with a bunch of saggy communication here. And you'll notice at the intersection of Centennial and Loggers as well, there's one really long one there that's been there for a long time, and this project will deal with that as well. As we proceed from the south, we've got the combination poles that lead right up to Raven, and we light the new crosswalk that we've got across Raven, as well as provide 2 fixtures in the Hendrickson parking lot. It's one of the concerns that we hear from people, even though the Slow Pitch Association is really pleased with the lights they have. As soon as the lights are out, it's really dark around there. So this is a really good opportunity for us to leverage us being there and to connect those and run those off the same. As we progress across this intersection, we continue to rip up north through here, and I'll switch to the next seat. But we continue to work north through the Logger Sports area, where we take advantage of the combination fixtures where we can, getting up into the campground. And then right at the BMX track entrance, where the trail diverges a bit from the road, you'll notice we've got a number of just single street lights here with the trail lights that are back, because the trail's a bit too far away for us to get the proper light pattern there. And that arrives at the southern entrance of Brennan Park. You'll notice that our conduit continues to run north from the southern entrance of Brennan Park all the way up until we get to the intersection of Centennial and Loggers. And so we've chosen not to proceed with the lighting here for a number of reasons, primarily because with some of the development in the area, the traffic impacts are being reviewed. And so what we wanted to do was look, what is the biggest footprint of something that we've heard or we've looked at? Let's make sure we overlay on this design so that if it's going to be a roundabout, that all of this infrastructure is set back. We've got junction boxes there that are easily connected. These areas here can, you could run lights over the tennis court, you could light back to Centennial, you could light to some of these driveways of Brennan Park. And as well, as part of our ongoing work with even the lights that we did last year, this dark fiber consideration for the network, which we have done all through Rose Park, would be proposed to be taken from Adventure Center to Finch, where we've terminated. utilizes some of the existing conduit that's there. So you'll notice with the stuff that we put in this year in the first quarter under Centennial, that we're running that back across the intersection and actually connecting to some of that existing conduit here. So we're really trying to empty the briefcase and take care of all these little bits and pieces as part of this project. That's the highlight of the design for this phase. If you'd like to see, I can just work through the next piece of Finch South. And this is the first phase, which is before you tonight, is just shy of 1 kilometer of light. So since we started lighting sections of the Corridor Trail a number of years ago, we're at roughly 1.2 kilometers of 7 kilometers. This would get us up over 2, and the subsequent second phase of that, which is this design in front of you, will get us to about 50%. So these are just concepts, just looking at how many fixtures in order for us to meet our bylaws as it relates to the roadway, and what do we need in order to light along the Corridor Trail from the Adventure Center all the way up, taking advantage of some of the crosswalks at Rose Park, the crosswalks that exist at the Smoke Bluffs, and lighting our way all the way up to Finch Drive.
So I'm just cognizant of time here, Matt.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that too. So we can call that
So
a,
this is awarding of a tender, and we had previously said that we wanted to have this type of information come to us when we were issuing the tender. I'm not sure that happened this time, but maybe you could speak to that. And then I'd like to get onto the overruns, like the scope, the difference in budgets.
so, absolutely.
Thank you.
So number one, the March 21st meeting is when we reviewed all the projects proposed for 2017, and we talked about this in depth on that meeting, as well as when we rode around, when council and staff went for a bike ride around, we discussed specifically this corridor, and as we came down into Rose Park as well. So I believe that council's been apprised of this project. We've received some resolution to proceed, and we are back with the results of the design of that project.
Yes, I just want to clarify that council's direction was we want pre-tender so we don't get into these elaborate discussions when the actual award of tender is happening. The council's direction was come with a pre-tender conversation. This is the tender document we're going out for on the project, so that we don't have to actually get into this type of conversation when really the decision in front of council is, do you want to award the tender or not? Just
So, message received.
yeah.
I think the decision before council is to award the tender or not.
Yeah.
If that, there's another bid in there to go back with the design and review that design prior to tender, I think that's what I'm hearing from you, so understood.
Yeah, but I think the decision in front of council is, do we go above our budget and issue this tenders?
Yeah, and so often when we're in here talking about capital projects, it's kind of do or don't. So with this project specifically, it is do as it's been tendered, or it provides a number of alternatives to that. And so that's why I wanted to provide some context around the design and what all these things mean and what are these options, so that we could explore those options, and if council wishes to proceed with those, that there's a mechanism in place to proceed with that.
So let's just clearly articulate what the options are.
So the option number one is that we proceed with the lighting project and leave all these power poles and all this communication gear in the air. So part of that is it reduced costs. It makes it extremely difficult to remove after, but it's possible. The second option is that the district cancel the tender and revise the design to suit the budget. So that may be a function of pull it back from the north, pull it back from the south, which would be that type of revision. That's up for discussion. And then the third option is to remove the streetlights and just do trail. The challenge of that, again, is it's very difficult to come back, that all those wooden hydro poles would exist. And there's a lot of density around these neighborhoods, and there's also, it's the concentration of a recreational area, and the subject of quite a few complaints that were received for safety concerns along this corridor.
Have Councillor Kent, Councillor Pryor,
So to your point about the poles and the two options, one is putting this in, but leaving the communication stuff up on the poles. So how much would that save us if we just left it as that?
you know, I think we'd have to go back and rework that piece.
Let me simplify it for you a little bit then. Would it cost more than to come in later and remedy that if we left it and then came back later and tried to remedy that? Would it?
Through you, Mayor Hanselman, absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of, we're going in there, we want to do this one. We've got sanitary force main, we've got buried hydro infrastructure, we've got water mains, we've got high water table, we've got overhead hazards, we've got mature trees on the west side. But nonetheless, you know, there's an option there to do what we can, maybe not what we want. So that's what it's
comment of emptying the suitcase.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea to get it done now. I agree, it may be a little extra, but I think that if you're in there, you might as well do it all now and get it finished and walk away.
And just if I could provide one more comment to that, Mayor Heinzman, is that, you know, due to some of the challenges, how some of that infrastructure was built in the last few years, and some of those developments that maybe didn't get to the finish line with some of those pieces, in order for us to actually proceed with this drawing, we had to go out there with ground penetrating radar and pick up everything underground in order to do it, because we didn't actually have even reasonable documentation for that. So again, we've gone out there and found a corridor for this that splits a lot of different other infrastructure, and it's not to say that we can't do it another way, but just that we've done it in a way that we believe that we can fit everything that we need in one trench to get ourselves all the way up through there, if that provides some of that.
Question?
Yes, so what does the actual overage look like?
As far as the cost?
Yeah.
So I included a budget table in the report that specifically looks at you know, the 2017 capital budget between roads and active transportation. So in the March 21st council meeting, we discussed 150 of that coming out of roads, 150 of that coming out of active transportation. I've included in there as a consideration, which is still being contemplated under the budget process, but the dark fiber network, and that there are these opportunities to proceed with these pieces, that $20,000 of that $100,000 for 2018 be considered under that, and recognizing that that is not approved yet, but this is a really good opportunity. And I actually brought the map to review kind of where we are in the dark fiber kind of, you know, jigsaw puzzle of getting these connections together, but in the understanding the lack of time.
So the difference is 300,000 was the budget and it's 470?
That's correct.
So it's 170,000 more, and there's obviously been a scope change.
And if I could just provide some other context to that, is that as we continue to work this, you know, we're doing a bit more, like we're getting across Finch. We're trying to do these little strategic pieces. Now we can kind of cut these pieces back, but ultimately...
There's been scope change.
It is. However, the direction that we've received loud and clear over the last few years is we want to see lights on that quarter trail. I think we've done a lot of that, but I think when we discussed, even what, at a concept level, what those costs look like, you know, we were in that $1 million range.
There may be really good reasons for the scope change, but there's been scope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Councillor Pryor and Councillor Strong.
Yeah, well, I mean, the money was what I was asking about too, so we do have it in the budget for 2018, right?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Heinzman, as part of it being in the 5-year capital plan for roads and active transportation, it's my understanding that it would be within council's authority to award that based on that as a funding opportunity.
Yeah. Would we have to pre-approve that today too, to
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman.
issue this tender?
Right now, we have a bylaw in place that includes for 2018 the roads budgets and the active transportation budgets. So we'd be on the right side of the law. The only risk is the 20,000 fiber optic, but in discussions with engineering, they're also willing to consider their roads budget if for some reason council didn't approve that in the next iteration. So far on the 2018 review of capital, council has been supportive of all of the projects indicated here. So we're on the right side of the law, and so far we seem to be on the right side of the political environment. So it's just whether you want to use your active transportation and roads for this additional amount.
That helps.
Well, I'll wait and hear what everyone else says now.
No, just, do you have another question? No. Councillor Strong.
Thanks. I just rode the new piece of Rose Park, and I was blown away at how much safer I felt. Like it's just to get lighting on the corridor trail, commuting north to south on that trail constantly, having lighting, and now a trail machine.
Do you have a question?
I don't. I just think this is. I totally appreciate this coming to council. I really think it's stuff. I think you've done an excellent job of looking at all
You can make those comments once we have a motion on the floor.
Can I put a motion on the floor?
I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. I don't see one moved. That we support option one, which is the additional
Yes, the additional
budget
funds from the-
and the additional scope. And we don't need to go out to tender to redo that, this is part of their submissions.
Yeah, that's correct.
Seconded by Councillor Kent. I do have a question. I always have to ask this question. How did Wilco Civil Inc. be so out of the realm of all the others?
So, through you, Mayor Heinzman, this is a public tender process, and so, we field a lot of questions from people. There are, that's an out-of-town contractor that we don't typically see in Squamish. We haven't debriefed with them. It was a compliant bid. I think there's a lot of things that are, unfamiliarity. There's living out costs for contractors out of town. To be honest with you, I'll try to get answers to that question.
It's $500,000 over the other bids.
And in fairness, I think it's something that we see on lots of projects. I think we see with this level of activity in the corridor and in the lower mainland as well, that we see spreads like that in public tender often. I think there are certain benefits to local contractors that know these areas and have worked in them before. And
Fraser City Installations isn't a local contract.
They aren't, no. So we had 2 in town and 2 out of town.
Any more comments? And if you're just going to say great, let's just move on and have the vote. Councillor Cryer.
Well, I was gonna say that Wilco Civil, they just had a typo there, and I think that was supposed to be 3, not 9.
It's possible, but we did check the numbers and they added up to that number.
Thanks for the valuable input, Councillor Cryer. Councillor Nash.
I'm not gonna say great, I'm just gonna say thank you for being forward-thinking. Always, I'm taking the opportunities when you see them.
Yeah. No, I was on the initial committee that strategized the corridor trail, and the lighting was always a goal. And 12 years later, I'm really happy we're getting it. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Isn't that just a long way of saying great?
That is a long way to say great. Absolutely.
Okay, and just one more thing. If there are other opportunities that present itself while this project's being built, we will absolutely take advantage of those.
Yeah.
You can count on it.
There's correspondence in front of council. There's affordable adult recreation programming. Absolutely happy to move this to staff. I'm anticipating staff, hopefully I already seen it. Seconded by Councillor Race. It was a rather tersely written letter. We welcome letters, however, I think certainly our staff have very good intentions, and this is good feedback. I wish it was a little more friendly, but appreciate the feedback. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a letter from Ms. Sear about public outhouses at the skate park, no, at Brennan Park, no, at skate park. Move that? Moved by Councillor Schveld. I'll second that.
So it's going to go to?
It's going to go to staff.
Perfect.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have a whole bunch of correspondence for information. I would like to pull the professional reliance one. I'd just like to highlight the invitation from Edith Toad. And
Can you pull the canvas one?
no, it's the one I was going to pull, so pull the canvas one. Motion, I'll just talk about it and then we'll do something with them all. So yeah, I wouldn't mind referring, there was actually sort of a request that we fill out or consider filling out. I would like to refer the letter to staff. The provincial government is looking for feedback on the professional reliance model, and I think having gone through 3 environmental assessment processes, we have a valuable perspective. So I would like us to fill out that provincial feedback. So move that we refer to staff for filling out the provincial feedback. Word that better. Seconded by Councillor Elliott. Yeah.
What are we gonna say?
Well, I don't know what the questions are yet, so I suspect the questions are going to be related to our experience with the EA process and the professional reliance model that it is founded on in terms of, is it, and I don't know, is there a deadline on that?
January 19th.
So maybe that can actually come back once, for a bit of discussion. I thought staff could look at it, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but have a look at it, if maybe we'll just leave it up to the CAO's discretion, if you feel that there's a more of an opinion that needs to be delved into with council, maybe bring it back, but if it's stuff we've already talked about, a matter of filling in the feedback, then is that all right, Councillor Reyes?
Well, I'm not sure, excuse me, we have talked about it, or have a consensus about what our view of that is. I mean, it's an important issue.
Yeah, and it
so
all depends on the questions that are.
Yeah, so I would prefer to see it.
Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I think fair enough would be great to see it and find a meeting in which we can talk about it. Certainly, I know just sitting on the community advisory committee, one of the things they pointed out was, I think that's related to this, is that people have lost confidence in provincial government oversight. And so I think that's part of the feedback, is that in certain circumstances, we need to be looking at the province to evaluate things, not just proponents and using proponents. So, and how we build confidence.
So we'll bring it back to a committee to have more discussion on it, yeah. Is that clear? The motion's clear? Is it okay to vote on it? Are you going to disagree with referring it to staff and it'll come back to committee for discussion?
Yeah,
for input?
yeah, I'm happy with that.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The other one was Edith Tobe. The Estuary, Watershed Society is going through quite a, they've got several $1 million of funding from the federal government to do a whole bunch of improvements and restoration of the estuary, and they're taking a very collaborative community approach to it, and they're inviting council to their meeting. I just wanted to highlight that for everybody. I believe they're holding a meeting here, but she wanted to extend the invitation, so I just want to make you aware of that. The Canada sales tax revenue, we did provide feedback, Councillor Chappelle, to federal government that kind of articulated very much what they're saying, which is, and it was prior to the federal government's announcement that it was going to be a 80-20 or 70-30 split. 20 to the feds and 80 to the province.
25-75.
25-75. And what this letter is saying is that 50% of the provincial should go to municipalities. So it's kind of in line with our third from before. So I think
We're just basically, it reiterates more resources from the municipality and tax.
absolutely, it was the same message we sent to the federal government. Now I think the federal government's made it clear that they expect the province to do the sharing. And so now our message should go to the province. So ridiculous. So is the motion to write a similar letter expressing similar perspective as expressed?
50-50 share seems reasonable to me.
50-50 of the province's share. Moved by Councillor Chappelle. I will second that. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to receive all the correspondence.
Just one thing. The trail one. Backing up, sorry. It says-
Oh, the Trans-Canada Trail?
Yeah, it says that they're receiving requests for grants. And they talk about for the network trail with addition of loops, spurs, providing more opportunities for information. So when it said loops, I thought about the turtle trail and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could get some money from these guys, and then when we went to BC Rail and said, hey, we want to go across your property, the feds are paying for it. So I just hope staff,
Yeah, maybe it's worthwhile just looking. I'm not sure that that's what they intend through this, but it can't hurt to look. Yeah.
loops and spurs, providing more opportunities to explore and to
Yep.
adventure.
I'm agreeing with you, Councillor Pratt.
Okay.
So you're referring this to staff? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
Motion to refer to staff. Is there a second? Second by Councillor Elliott. And huge kudos that they finally completed the trail and now there's still lots of improvements being made and that type of thing, but We've actually connected coast to coast. Not coast to coast to coast here, just coast to coast.
No, it's coast, coast, coast.
It is all three, good job. I'll call the question, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Motion to receive all the letters. Moved by Councillor Spell, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. There's minutes from the special business meeting of December 5th, the regular business meeting of December 5th, the budget committee of the whole meeting of December 11th, the budget committee of the whole meeting of December 12th, special business meeting of December 12th, and special business meeting of there was two special business meetings. Move that all those meetings minutes be approved. Is that moved by Councillor Kent? I move that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a recommended motion from the budget. Do I have to read it all out? No.
Some are opposed, so.
Okay. That line 39 of the capital plan lists annual road reconstruction increase be reduced to $100,000 in the 2018 budget, and that line 44 University Bridge repairs be included in the annual road reconstruction budget. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Is there one here that someone was opposed to, that someone wants to vote against, and we'll just pull it? Is there one here, anything here that, is there anything here that someone wants to oppose? I'm going to entertain a motion that we approve all the recommended motions from the Committee of the Whole December 11th Council Budget Workshop in the General Fund. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Recommended motion from the December 12th budget meeting that Council provide a letter of support to the RCMP grant application, and that $9,600 be provided from the Truth and Reconciliation budget 2017 Truth and Reconciliation budget toward the purchase of a canoe. So there's that 2017. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There are a whole bunch of community enhancement grants, and I'm just looking for anyone who's in conflict on any of them to highlight them for me. If they are, I'm going to entertain a motion for all of them.
There are some.
Okay, we'll pull the Quest one. Is that the only one anybody is in conflict with? I'll entertain a motion to approve all the motions as per the community enhancement grants for the budget committee of December 12th with the exclusion of the Quest University motion. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
The Quest is out.
Quest, we're going to now consider, and Councillor Elliott's going to.
Recuse myself, as a contract.
Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Aaron, is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Committee minutes and reports. There's Community Development Standing Committee minutes to be received for information from December 5th. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor and myself. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Public Art Select Committee minutes as amended in front of you. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a recommended motion from the Public Art Select Committee that Council recommends Council that the following properties. So I guess the motion from Council would be that Council approve the following properties as public art walls. Soccer kicking field, skate park, under the boulevard, and a concrete lock box, Highlands Way North. There was also discussion that, I'll move that now. Is there a second? Second by Councillor Chappelle. This conversation came up, as you may know, I guess, before this term, we approved 4 public art walls in the community. 2 of them have since been painted with murals, so maybe 3 of them now have since been painted with murals. So basically there are public art walls out there that are sort of sanctioned by council. So the idea is to create more public art walls so people don't paint over the murals that are now no longer public art walls because they actually have public art on them. So that's what the intention of this. There was also discussion to ensure that staff are going to talk to Soccer Association to ensure that it's okay. So I'm just wondering if we just want to provide a qualifying comment that provided in consultation with the Soccer Association. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. There's no camera and staff announcements. There's no unscheduled public attendance anymore. Open question period for clarification. And finally, there was a motion earlier today that would be great to ratify before we go away for Christmas. And the recommendation is that $9,000 from council contingency be allocated towards the childcare needs assessment in partnership with Seaside Community Services and the Ministry of Children and Family Development. The paper's on the floor. That was moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Lewis. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Chappelle is opposed. Motion carries. We are now at the end of the meeting. We didn't really do council staff and calendar announcements. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, happy Christmas, happy solstice, happy. See you in January. See you in 2018. No, motion to terminate, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries.